Hello and welcome back. In this episode, David and I talk through the past couple decades of film and television in the Metro Vancouver area. David shares some of his adventures, and we discuss the highs and lows of the superhero era in entertainment. David brings us the perspective of an assistant locations manager and helps us understand a bit about the logistics side of the locations department and how creativity can be applied in ways not traditionally considered creative. Welcome back to Creative Conversations. Today we are talking to David Costello, an ALM in Vancouver's film industry. David has been in the film industry since the 90s? Earlys?
2003.
Oh, I thought you said 93 when we were at the coffee shop.
No, 93. I was still living in Montreal and going to college.
Okay. Maybe did we
Long
talk
before I came
about
to
that at all? What did you do in college?
A few things.
Me
too. I was in the creative arts program, but I also did a few other courses on the side. But yeah, it's film studies. I was in a theater program doing the technical side of theater.
Okay.
Set building, lighting design, or lighting setup. And
Were you a
like that.
theater kid in high school?
Not really. Not really. I wasn't involved in theater productions. I got involved not so much with the theater side at high school, but we had a variety show.
Okay.
And in my final grade there, I was actually in one of the skits of it. I think the year before I'd helped with some backstage stuff, but in my graduating year, me and a buddy of mine got on stage and did a recreation of the Monty Python parrot skit.
Nice. Monty Python has some classics. Solid.
And of course, we did our audition and got in because we were the only people doing comedy. Everyone else was doing either lip syncing or dancing. So they went, we need some variety.
Not a lot of variety in this variety show so far.
Yeah. That was that's pretty much as close to theater I got to in high school.
Is that what inspired you to go into it in university? Or like, why did you decide that route?
Oh, it wasn't actually in university. I did when I came out here for university. I was in theater here.
Okay, so you went to college and then university.
Yeah. Well, in Quebec, it's a different school system, right? You go from high school, which ends in grade 11, to through a Cégep program, which is 2 to 3 years, which is basically like, say, going to Douglas College.
Oh,
but I think it's even
okay.
cheaper than that, or it was back when I did it.
Well, yeah, I remember when I was at SFU, there was there were a bunch of what's the word that I'm looking for? Protests in Quebec about raising the tuition prices. And then like me and all my friends being students, we were like, well, if they're protesting the raise, like what are they paying? We looked it up and their tuition was like $1,400 a semester. And we were already paying twice that at SFU. So we were like, they're picketing over this? Why we want lower prices?
Why are we revolting?
Yeah. Why are we just accepting this? Ours is twice as high as theirs.
Yeah, I think when I was at SFU, it was not. It was probably about $1,600.
Oh man, I think in my last year I was paying $3,500 to $4,500 a semester.
Wow. Yeah, I never paid that when I was in SFU.
There's supposed to be like caps on how much courses can cost according to credits, but they get around that by adding a bunch of course fees and lab fees onto, especially in engineering. They're like, oh, you need to pay like $250 per class for lab fees. And it's like, we use 10 resistors that are they cost 10 cents for all 10 resistors if you like bought them in bulk like the school does. So like, why is this $250?
Yeah, I was in I did the theater program there. So not so much in materials or books. So pretty cheap courses in a way because you're not having to spend on so many high lab fees for, the various things.
So what prompted going into film studies and theater for you?
Well, I loved film studies because I loved movies. Grew up with movies all my life, TV, all that kind of stuff.
So did you always want to get into the film industry? Is that why you moved here?
Yes. I figured I would end up out here back in the 90s because we heard so much about like the Vancouver film industry was doing really well because of the X-Files, and that was
Stargate.
Stargate started after I moved here, I think Stargate started around the same time I moved here, or just after I moved here. But X-Files was definitely the big one. Plus, there was other movies that were shooting out here. It was becoming more widely known across Canada that Vancouver was the place to go for film. Not so much in Ontario, but they started building up again. And unless you were completely fluent in French, getting work in Montreal would have been. I wasn't very fluent in French. I could get by, but not probably to the level I would have needed to survive.
Even growing up over there.
Yep.
Huh. Is it like very region dependent then on?
Well, you grow up in a city like Montreal, and it's very bilingual. I mean, I grew up in an English family.
So that definitely makes a big difference. Like when the language you hear at home all the time is English, that's definitely going to be.
But then you walk out the door and you hear, French, or you don't have, not necessarily, because you can go anywhere into downtown Montreal, go into any store there, and they will speak both English and French.
I had the one time I've been to Montreal, I mean, for the most part, yes, everyone could talk back to me much better than I could speak to them. But I did walk into a couple stores where, like, I didn't know enough French to get by, and I had to go find an alternative.
There's definitely areas of Montreal that is going to be like that. I haven't lived there since '96 is when I moved out, and I go back every once in a while and notice the changes. But so I don't know exactly what it would be like now. I was just there in the summer, and I was walking around downtown, had no problems.
I guess.
And also, you start picking up French again a little bit as you go along, like starting to be able to read it. Going, oh yeah, there it is on a sign. I know what that sign says.
Reading it helps recognize and remember the language a lot, definitely.
Yeah. Besides, ordering in a restaurant's actually pretty easy. You look at the menu, just repeat what's on there, and there you go.
Yeah. This one time when I was in France, I was doing a Europe trip, and we were only in France for like 2 days. Me and one friend landed in France to meet two others that were coming over there from Germany. And we were just like walking around touring places, and we stopped at a convenience store to get something to drink. And on the shelf, I thought it was juice. It had a picture of strawberry on it, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, strawberry juice. I grab it. We go find a spot. We have a little picnic lunch kind of thing. And I open it and I take a swig of it to realize that it is not juice. It is actually pure syrup to mix with juice. So I just got an entire mouthful of like 90% concentrated sugar.
Right.
And then we ended up having to lug that bottle around for like the next week and a half. One of my other friends would just like slowly add it to bottles of alcohol that he had, just like make his cider or wine a little more fruity.
Right. Wow.
It was a very jarring sensation to get a mouthful of sweet sugar.
Bit of a sugar rush.
Definitely.
You needed that extra energy.
Yeah. Especially with the jet lag.
Oh, yeah.
I'm terrible at sleeping on planes, so like my strategy, at least when I was younger, was I would try to stay up like the night before, thinking I would sleep on the plane before I realized that there is absolutely no hope that I'll sleep on a plane. And then I would just end up being awake all night and then being awake the whole time on the flight and then being exhausted when I land, regardless of what time I land.
Right.
So let's dive back to the film industry and some of the creative things. So on the note of being an ALM, what about being an assistant locations manager do you consider creative? Or, well, and alternatively, what aspects of being an assistant locations manager are not creative?
Well, I mean, most of what I deal with is logistics of the film shoot, right? Not so much like the picking of the locations, which would be in the department, probably the more creative side of it. But I think there's definitely some kind of creativity to looking at a certain kind of space that you're going to be filming in and figuring out where everything's going to go. So it's not seen on camera, right? Or in such a way, trying to hide the truck somewhere. So you work with transport on that, but you got to come up with some in some places it's easy. It's a giant parking lot. Just put them all there.
Right.
We're never seeing past this building. Great. Perfect. Other times it's like a farm field and we're seeing between two trees and yeah. And you can only put them like here, kind of maybe over here or whatever. You got to come up with, yeah.
And then you put it in one place and halfway through the day, they're like, all right, we're turning around. We need to move everything.
Yeah. It usually happens more with tents and gear.
Yeah.
The fun part.
So like one of the things that I want to discuss with people on this show is kind of along the lines of what you just pointed out, the difference between more traditionally considered creative aspects, like for example, like you said, picking a location would be maybe a little more traditionally creative in the sense that like you're trying to take the script and make it come to life by finding something that someone above the line has decided looks similar to what the script is trying to convey. But there are creative aspects to almost everything we do in life, especially since creativity is largely problem solving. So,
Yeah.
what parts of your job do you utilize creativity in the most, do you
Well,
think?
I mean, most of the job is problem solving. It's someone comes up with an idea, you have to figure out, solve their problem in such a way that it benefits the production so that the cameras can roll and you can keep going on. Um, yeah, it's a lot of it's also just problem solving on the day, like being on the ground and realizing that when you get there, something has happened. Like, say, a construction site all of a sudden started up right where you're supposed to be filming,
That wasn't there
or
2
like
days before,
or a
yeah.
block down the road on a street, and it's like, well, now we got, or in the parking lot that we were going to be using for something, all of a sudden
Right.
there's a giant hole there. So trying to come up with new ways to work around that uh, is pretty much it. It's all problem solving, which comes up with some creative ideas in some cases.
Is it often problem solving in terms of like working with other departments to help them and your department resolve an issue, or is it working mostly with the public and like the businesses you're working around? Because I know the locations department is like kind of the liaison to
Yeah.
the public also.
I'd say for me, it's about 50-50.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's someone on the night, say you're shooting at night, and something that was never brought up before because maybe someone didn't realize they needed it, but all of a sudden they want a light over like half a block away, possibly on someone's property. No, maybe not on the property itself, but usually they kind of go, "I want it on that rooftop." And it's like, you can't get on that rooftop. It's 2 a.m. and nobody's there to talk to about putting it on a rooftop.
Yeah.
So it's helping them come up with a different, to achieve the same look,
How
come up with a
often
different solution for it.
is there like how much tact is there involved in? Because like if they come to you with an idea like that, that's like, are you hearing yourself? Do you have like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. How do you think we're gonna get a light on that roof, kind of thing? Like, how much is there where you have to kind of like dance around communication with them in a way that they're like you're not gonna hurt their ego by telling them that like that's impossible, but also you're like maybe trying to suggest an alternative and perhaps even convince them that it was their idea so they don't hate it so much.
That's the talent part of it, is making them think that they've actually come up with the idea themselves, and you've kind of helped push them along that way. It's kind of more the way I've done it. I haven't actually worked with these types of people, but I do know there's been a few ALMs out there in the world who I've heard of who get more confrontational with people about stuff like that, or are more willing to say, like, no, it's not so much about saying, no, you can't do that. It's kind of like saying, no, you can't do that. Find another way like you said, not to try to hurt their ego
Yeah.
or try to help them come up with a different solution and work with them.
Right.
Is pretty much what it's all about. It's working with them to achieve that shot. If it is completely impossible, like say they want it on top of Harbor Center and that's not going to happen.
Do you have Deadpool budget?
There's that. Or, hey, can we, I know it's a late call, but can we shut down the Georgia Viaduct right now? It's like, no. That's like days, weeks of planning. Or
That's actually I'm very curious because like the only thing that I know of that did do that is Deadpool. How long does it take to set up that big of a?
I'm not sure with Deadpool. I know Deadpool, because they wanted to do it. They did all during daytime, so they had to do it between the rush hour periods. I've been on shows where we shot on the viaduct. When I was on Arrow, we shot on the viaduct a few times, but it was all nighttime. And so
Man,
basically,
most of that show was shot at night.
yeah. And what they would do is they would let us onto the viaduct. I think it was from 7 p.m. until we had to be cleared off of it. I think it was by 6 a.m. So we had that window to shoot on
Okay.
all night. And it was not that hard. It's like they'll let you do it. You got your police involved, blocking the roadways. But for what Deadpool did, I have no idea how they convinced the city to do it, other than the city was already planning on tearing down the viaduct and probably wanted to figure out how traffic would manage around the city.
Oh, used it as a research project.
Yeah, but also Deadpool had a very limited window every single day, so they were up there for quite a long time
Huh.
shooting that one opening scene, which is like a huge chunk of the movie, really. When you sit down and watch it, it's like, oh yeah, they really were up there for quite some time.
Yeah, especially when you end up on the behind the camera side of the film industry and you realize how much recording actually goes into like a 5-minute scene.
Yeah.
Like I think one of my preps at Deer Lake Park, it was a week of prep and a week of wrap for a week of shooting in between, which they didn't end up getting because it rained for 3 days and it was supposed to be sunny California. So they got like 2 days of shooting, but ultimately, like all of that work amounts to like 5 minutes of screen time.
Yeah. I know. Years ago, I worked on a feature, the first Percy Jackson movie, and I think we spent the first, 5 or 6 days in studio shooting what amounted to about half a page of work. But it was a lot of it was visual effects. So there was a lot of it's the setup for it that took so much time. Because then you're like shooting maybe 3-4 shots, and that was your day. Because they basically spent it's all like getting everything like for visual effects and special effects and all the green screen and all that.
Right.
Saying, oh, this is where the Hydra's going to be. Now everyone look kind of way up here.
There's someone with a stick holding a tennis ball up for eye lines?
There was actually someone had a cardboard cutout of what a Hydra looks like. And they were kind of positioning on set just for the actors to have an idea to understand what a Hydra is.
Right.
3-headed creature, that mythological creature. Dragon type thing.
Definitely helps to give something to look at. I remember one time, it was actually on Nancy Drew.
Oh yeah, that one.
With the stand-in for Nancy. We were talking one of the nights we were at Riverview, and she was telling me like a bit about the evolution of a stand-in and like what their job is and what their job used to be. And she was like, yeah, essentially we replaced tennis balls on a stick. So after that, every time I saw her, I was like, hey, how's my favorite tennis ball on a stick today?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what it started as, but as far as I know, stand-ins has been around a long time, and they've all been doing the same thing from what I've seen. Standing in. Are they right height? Okay. Stand on an apple box because you're a little shorter.
For the longest time, like at least at the start of Nancy Drew in the first season, it took probably about until December before I realized that she was the stand-in and not Nancy. That's how, like, because her hair was like the exact same color, they were pretty good match for each other as far as stand-in and cast goes.
Right. Yeah, I remember kind of seeing that too. When I first joined on that show, I didn't know who the cast was. And so every now and then I'd be looking over thinking that it was our lead, but it's not. It's the stand-in. But she was actually filling because she's also used as a photo double.
Oh,
or at least one of them was used
that
as
makes
photo
sense
double.
since they looked so similar.
Yeah, the behind the shot kind of thing.
Yeah. So what are some of the shows that you've worked on over the years? What are some of your favorite projects and potentially, well, if you're willing to share least favorite projects?
I think I've been kind of lucky for that I've actually had a good experience in the last 20 years of working on shows. One of my favorite...
For the listeners, that is rare.
One of my favorite shows that I ever worked on, even though it's not the best movie, and I think I may have mentioned this to you before, was The Wicker Man. Back in 2005, working as a PA, driving the Loke van. It was just a fun movie to work on. It was the crew I was working with, the other PAs who we had worked with a couple of times before that on other shows, and we just all really got along. The ALM was great to work with on that, and the show itself mostly shot. There was a few night scenes, but most of it was daytime shooting.
That is so nice. It makes a huge difference. Shooting at night can be very draining.
And they actually did shoot. I think it was mostly 10-hour days. They would fly through their days on that show. So, and we also got to go up to Merritt for like 3 days and have a good time and, shoot on a roadway and then go back and drink in town at night and go back the next day and do it again, then go back to the bar that night. And
as much as PAs kind of get thrown under the bus on set, there is definitely an aspect of the job that I feel like is more fun than some of the other departments because you end up as this like little team inside the greater production where like you know that everyone else in the production isn't necessarily looking out for you, so you
Right.
kind of have to look out for each other a little bit more. And you end up like, I feel like in my experiences on different shows, you end up with a lot of camaraderie between the PAs on a specific set, whereas you don't get camaraderie between the other departments and the PAs as much. So like,
It depends on the show. I mean, Nancy Drew definitely had a much more camaraderie between like the PAs and even the rest of the crew. Definitely much deeper respect I found than on some shows where I have been on. Like,
yeah,
when I was a PA working on this one feature years ago, like on I think it was John Tucker Must Die. There was
didn't know
definitely
that was
not
filmed here.
that. You were definitely treated like you the stereotypical way of PAs being treated of what you hear about,
Right.
basically like garbage, or like, oh, you're not important, but you're only important when we need you.
Yes, pretty much that.
But I found on Nancy Drew it was definitely much more of a family on that one. So
Yeah, it was definitely well. So like my first two shows were Motherland season 1 and Nancy Drew season 1, and I started them in the same week.
right,
And there was a very large difference in seeing how the productions were run between Motherland season 1 and Nancy Drew season. Like Motherland season 1 was a nightmare
Oh,
to
really?
work on. Like, so when I started it, it was the last month of shooting, and me being there for that whole last month made me one of the most senior crew, because over the first 7 months of the shooting, they had cycled through almost like every crew member in every department of their show, because they were just doing relentless like 18+ hour days, and they were doing like lots of night stuff, lots of like really difficult stuff in rain, and like people were just sick of it. They were pushing
Right.
the crew really hard. So lots of people would leave, and then like people that would come, they'd only work like 2 days a week, and then they'd go work on other shows because they just didn't want to stick out a whole week at this place. And then I go from that, where literally my first day on set was an 18-hour day,
Yeah.
to Nancy Drew, where everything just felt like it was more organized. Like things were a little bit more smooth.
Right.
They kept to the schedules better. And yeah, like the general atmosphere on set, I felt was a little bit friendlier, largely probably because it was at the start of its season, so everyone was fresh, whereas Motherland was at the end, so everyone was burnt out.
Yeah, I found I joined on Nancy Drew partway through season 1. I wasn't there from the beginning of it, and I came on doing prep, so I didn't really get to know the crew that much. I saw all the prep crews for the most part, and then occasionally was on set for 10 minutes when they were shooting before moving on to the next thing I had to go do. So I didn't really notice that then, but when I became the on-set ALM for seasons 2 through 4, I started seeing a little bit more of that, and how the crew treated locations in general, and they even treated the actual physical locations we go to very well too. Whereas, actually, there's been a few shows I've been on where you're thinking, we're seriously going to that mansion with this crew, really? Okay.
Yeah, Nancy Drew shot at a lot of mansions.
Yeah. But with this crew, I wasn't really. After seeing them work, I wasn't too worried. I don't know how the LMs were on that. Thinking about it, but I think we pretty much got out of most of those places without any real problems.
Yeah, I mean, as
So-
far as the locations department went, like they had a team of people that like really genuinely cared about protecting the location. Like with Josh as the main prep PA, like he took his job so insanely seriously. Like he was just always on the ball. He needed to get everything done and wanted to make sure anything was done before taking any breaks or slacking off at all. All of his work was like extremely thorough. Like everything got protected. I like the shows that I had worked on, like with the crew from Motherland, we went to a couple different shows, and like working along with them, even though they were my main crew, they never like really properly trained me in how to protect at a prep site.
Right.
So I learned a lot of it actually from watching Josh be super thorough at a bunch of the mansions on Nancy Drew.
Yeah, and I think it's probably how he was trained too. He worked a lot with the location manager there, Heather, who definitely believes in protecting locations. And I was working more with Rob, the other LM on the show, and he's also the same way. So you definitely get that sense of like, we must protect everything, and it worked out. That's how you do it. How you get out of these places without having like $50,000 L&D damages.
Yes, especially when you're working in a bunch of mansions in North Vancouver.
Definitely. So especially North Vancouver. But yeah.
Did
So-
Nancy Drew ever work at one? Actually, I think that might have been on Virgin River, but there was one mansion we were at that had parts of their floor were glass that like you walk over it and it looks like down the mountainside kind of thing. And
yeah, I don't remember that.
yeah, they wanted to move a piano over it, and like there was all kinds of. They had probably 24 pieces of extremely expensive art all over the place, and they ended up using like they'd rent the art from them to use on screen, and that means we couldn't take down any of their art, which means we had to be super careful about not damaging it while they're trying to bring dollies through their house.
Right. Oh, the fun part.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely seen that a few times, but never had artwork get damaged. So
I have not seen any yet either, which is
like
good
that.
because so far the only things I've seen get damaged are things that are replaceable, which is nice. You mentioned that on Nancy Drew there's 2 LMs. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic of LMs on, because it's usually long-running shows that do 2 that alternate, or do movies also do 2 that alternate? How does that LM dynamic work on different productions?
On TV, it makes sense on TV to me because it's episodic, right?
Yeah.
Or even
gives them a little bit of a break.
Yeah, it's when one's filming, one's prepping. So in some cases you don't have that, though. Some shows don't do that, especially if the show is more studio heavy. If I find there's probably 1 LM, but maybe like 3 or 4 ALMs.
Right. There's a lot less locations work to do if they're at a studio all the time, so you don't really need the second.
Yeah, and it just depends, I think, on how the producers want to set it all up. But to me, it kind of works well with two LMs dealing with different episodes, and it's probably less stress on one person.
Yeah,
to do it all.
That's something that I think is very important in the film industry because it's already such a high stress environment that, like, if you try to extend one person doing all of that work across a 4 to 6 to 8 month project, like,
yeah,
I don't see how they don't come out a rage beast on the other side of it with all the sleep deprivation.
But there are shows that do that too, right? But then they're probably like either 50% in studio or a little bit higher than that in studio.
Yeah.
But there are shows definitely that do the whole 1 LM thing, but then they have a huge team of ALMs and to help deal with the prep of each episode and the on-set work of each episode. Movie-wise, the only time I've ever seen like a movie that had like say 2 LMs on it was that you had your main unit LM and then a second unit LM was brought in possibly. And it doesn't always happen, but I've seen it like once or twice. Okay. But usually there's 1 LM and then they bring in again their army depending on the budget of the show,
right?
Of ALMs, and who then get spread out everywhere.
The weirdest, most unique one that I saw probably was the Snowpiercer series. They had 1 LM who was also their ALM because they literally, like, the first day that I worked on their show was like halfway through season 2. It was their first location day ever. Because they were doing a flashback to before the planet froze over.
Right.
And I ended up working like 2 or 3 more days on the show later just as a fill-in when they were back at the studio, but they didn't do another single location day. So they just like had this one location manager for a few little insert things or like establishers, I guess. And
yeah, I remember seeing that on the film list when we all looked at it and thought, they have an LM. What's going on? All of a sudden, because before it was just like one per, like say an ALM or an LM, and then 3 or 4 PAs, and that was it. And all of a sudden they had a locations team because, yeah, like you said, they had that flashback. But I think they did it again in one of their last, maybe it was the last season they just did, where they had a lot more location filming. Yeah, because I remember hearing the stories of that, of like being in Steveston with people all wearing like parkas and everything, but it's a heat wave.
Classic. Yep.
Yeah. Dangerous.
I think one of my only like MOW experiences was in Squamish, of course, in July, and it was like 28 degrees out, and they're filming a Christmas MOW, and like the whole thing was filmed in this one shop. It was a clothing store they had converted into like a Christmas trinket store. And we just spent all day in front of the shop shooting inside of it. And the background holding was just a line of chairs like at the side of the building. So they all pile out and they're in their parkas and sweaters and thick
Yeah.
jackets and whatnot and sitting in the chairs. It's 28 degrees outside.
I think I've only worked on a couple of Christmas MOWs, and both times I worked on them, they set it in like California, so they didn't have to worry about snow or anything. So it could just be like people in shorts and all that. But then you still had in July everyone's driveway down this one cul-de-sac, all decorated with
Yeah.
the usual snowman and Christmas lights everywhere.
hmm A reindeer and a lawn, probably.
Yeah, but they opted not to go with the whole snow aspect of it, which was kind of nice. Because I have been on shows too where we've done it. Show took place in Wisconsin, and they had to do snow effects,
Mm,
and that can get pretty messy, and
yes.
especially when
Yeah.
you're outside somewhere.
I had this kind of the like flip alternative, although this was years and years ago when I was still in university. I was walking down the street in New West and they were filming an MOW there, and it wasn't quite July. It wasn't that bad. It was like March, I think. But there was definitely no snow on the ground, and they had like 3 or 4 houses kind of next to each other, like decked out with all this fake snow for their scene.
Yeah.
That must have been a nightmare to clean up.
That depends what they're using, but yeah.
Do they have anything that like just dissolves, or what are some of the things that they
Oh,
use?
I don't know anymore. There used to be various products that special effects were able to use, but most communities won't allow it anymore.
Mm.
So a lot of it, what they do is they bring in fish ice, like just shaved ice from fish packing plants. They can get it's all fresh. It's not like fish has not been in it.
Oh yeah.
It's all fresh, but they refer
I was
to it
gonna
as,
say, do they just like spray that at the actors and then everyone smells like fish?
no, they refer to it as fish ice, but it's just shaved ice. So they bring it in, they shovel it into piles. We actually did that on an episode of Nancy Drew
Oh really?
back in, I think it was season 3. We because it had snowed
Mm.
when we obviously didn't want it to, but it snowed, so we couldn't do anything about it. So then every other scene that happened after that, we had to have some snow in it
Mm.
to
Yeah.
just match for continuity. So they brought this in, and we were in Horseshoe Bay, and they're like putting little piles of snow around like lamp posts and things, just so that it kind of fits the continuity of the house that we shot that had snow in the front yard because it snowed the night before. So
I think Nancy Drew is the only show that I got hit by snow multiple times. Like other shows that I'd worked on had issues with snow the same days that Nancy Drew had issues with snow. I just happened to be on Nancy Drew every time it snowed.
right,
One of them was we were filming at the city center in Surrey. And part of it, like in the big courtyard where the SkyTrain and the library is and
Yeah.
whatnot. And like they were supposed to see this entire courtyard out the windows. And I get up for my call. The call was like 7 a.m. or something. And at first I have to like scrape my car, brush off the windows. Like almost barely got there because my car door, the sensor on it was like freezing, so it didn't want to like recognize that the door was closed and locked.
right.
And then I get there and we literally spend the next like 4 hours shoveling that courtyard because they're like, we're gonna get this. We just like we need to shovel it and keep it clear. And then by like 9 o'clock, as much as we shoveled, there was like another 6 inches of snow on the ground behind us where we had shoveled earlier, and they were like, all right, we're gonna force majeure this. We're shutting it down.
I remember that day because I remember that day very well because we were also at a house in Surrey nearby that we're supposed to shoot at.
A
And-
house in Guildford.
Yeah, me and one of the PAs out there were shoveled the main walkway of the house. It was like almost like knee deep snow, and just him and I out there
Yeah.
shoveling just to make sure that people could walk to the house to prep it. And then the next day, I think, is when we were supposed to shoot at Surrey City Hall there. And then I was on the tech survey that day. And we're like trying to get around the city of Vancouver in a bus while it's like snowing. And they went, you know what? We're never going to get from here to like the North Shore. It's too wet. So
Yeah.
they're saying, yeah, we're calling force majeure on this. After this location, we're going to go back to the office. And that's pretty much our day. And that pretty much was. We didn't get to see all our locations that day for this tech survey. But I do remember that. And then because I remember they pushed it to like, I think the Saturday.
Yes.
And
yeah.
yeah. to finally get it after the snow had calmed down. And the city, I think, did some cleaning up out there for us.
Yeah, I think like by the time we were leaving, I think they had hired someone with a cat to come plow the courtyard because like doing it with
Oh, yeah.
shovels just wasn't
Yeah.
happening. It wasn't viable.
No, that's a big courtyard too, and they wanted to
It's
see all of it because I remember they were
huge,
shooting,
yeah.
like, I think, inside the building, looking out.
And that entire wall is just windows.
The funny thing too about that was that we were going to shoot that. I think it was on a Wednesday or something. It was a weekday, and we were going to be one of the first shows to have actually been able to shoot during office hours inside. The amount of work it took to actually to get that together, then all of a sudden go, no, we're going to force majeure this day, and we'll just move to Saturday where we can film inside no matter what. Yeah, that's where a lot of work came into it, and then kind of.
It was
Whatever.
honestly probably better to have done it on Saturday because I remember even on Saturday without any of the regular staff being there, we were still struggling to keep noise levels down because like everything in that like
Yeah.
the entrance foyer area there is huge and
Yeah.
just open and echoey.
Yeah, and you can't close it off to the public during a weekday, and you have the cafe that's like right there, and
Yeah.
people going to the security desk to check out keys or get appointments or whatever. And then I think the other there was another like information desk down there. So yeah, it's a huge space, just voices bouncing around that place.
Yeah. It probably would have been a massive headache to do it during the week.
Probably, but they were willing to, and the city they managed to make it work with the city until the force majeure happened because snow.
Yeah.
So, and the whole front end of that building, as you saw, is just nothing but floor to ceiling glass. So you
Yes.
can't even like cover any doorway up to like so you don't look out and not see the snow.
And like literally on both sides, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter what direction you're pointing the
Yeah.
camera.
You're gonna see snow if you don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good time. It's always fun when it snows in this city because we're just not quite prepared for it. Even when you're looking at the forecast and it's going, yeah, like in a week from now it's going to be like a big blizzard. Yeah,
Yeah, and then everyone is
Whatever.
like, no, it doesn't snow here. And then every year, it's like there is a big blizzard where it snows like 1 foot to 2 feet. And everyone is like, no, that never happens. And then it
Yeah.
happens again every year.
Yeah.
And you're like, how does this surprise everyone every year?
well, it's like last year when it hit in November and all the traffic jams around. I was in Steveston when it hit.
Oh,
And
man.
we called the day early shooting there because we're shooting outside just to get everyone home. And it still took me 4 hours to get home from Steveston to New West.
Man, sometimes it doesn't even need to be snowing for it to take 4 hours to get home from Steveston.
No, but I know a couple of PAs who are working for me. I think it took them like close to 8 hours because they had to go to the valley.
Oh, man.
And
Ouch.
leaving at like 4 in the afternoon, it's like getting back at midnight. Getting home at midnight. I think they were both like, yeah, we're not coming in tomorrow. It's like, yeah, no problem. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it.
Yeah.
I understand.
Last year when we had the snow dump at our show, I was lucky enough to have been working from home that day already, so it didn't bother me at all. And then in the evening, I went to a movie at New West Station. And we took the SkyTrain because I was like, that weather, man, there's no way we're driving. This is just going to be a nightmare to get there and back if we drive. And sure enough, riding the train there, just like jam-packed taillights, just everyone stopped dead on
Yeah.
every road was a parking lot. And then when I got to the movie theater, we actually ran into my boss because he decided leaving the office that traffic was so bad he was going to stop and watch a movie before trying to go home because he didn't want to sit in his car for 3 hours doing nothing.
Yeah.
And he ended up watching 2 movies before he left.
Well, it is one way to beat the traffic, right? If you're not going to
Yeah.
be going anywhere, why bother?
Oh, yeah,
If you can do it.
exactly. You're just staring at the taillights in front of you. It's
Yeah.
mind-numbing, aggravating, draining.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So what about, like, what are some of your favorite aspects of film? What drew you in as, like, to be a film buff, to love it so much, to make it your career? What aspects of it do you like so much?
I guess overall, it's the storytelling of it all. Like I can watch I've watched so many different types of movies over the years. Like not one particular genre attracts me necessarily. Like I don't just like the big spectacles. I'll go for the smaller indie features also.
A
So
lot of
it's
the times
really
those
just
are
about
way better movies.
It is. It's really just about the storytelling. But if the big spectacle can actually tell a good story,
Mhm.
then I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah, definitely.
Same thing with any of it. Even if I'm not a huge horror movie fan necessarily, but there's a few horror movies that I've liked over the years that kind of get stuck in my mind, where others just kind of, whatever,
Right.
because of the storytelling and how it's presented to you.
Storytelling is absolutely pivotal to pretty much like I don't think a lot of people really appreciate to the extent how important storytelling is because it is like from the dawn of civilization, storytelling is how we have passed information from one generation to the next. It's how we've made people engage in the information that we're sharing. It's how you make people care about what you're doing, what they're doing, the greater good of the community. It's how you entertain people. Uh, there's so many aspects and
Yeah.
angles to storytelling that make it important, and it is like really a universal constant in that it pulls people's attentions in. It gives their brains new stimulus to consider different angles of things that they either already knew or things that they didn't know. That yeah, stories are great for delivering information of all sorts.
And that's pretty much what attracts me to it is the story any good? It could seem like you can watch a trailer and go, that looks like a great story, and then go to the movie and realize maybe not so much.
Yeah, something I found with trailers these days is a lot of trailers end up being like 2 to 3 minutes long, and you get the entire story in the trailer.
My favorite on that was it was back, I guess it was the early '90s, mid '90s, whenever Free Willy came out. I remember the trailer for it. I never saw the movie, and I felt I didn't have to because in the trailer, at the end of the trailer, they show the whale jumping over the wall and the kid standing underneath it as it's flying over him. It's like, well, I know how it ends, so why would I go see this movie now? I feel like I've seen it in this, and that was at the time when trailers were starting to become 2-3 minutes long. So
Yeah, there's definitely an art form to picking the scenes from your production that are going to help sell it to a crowd in trailers versus just like blowing your load on everything that was good in the movie right away.
well, sometimes you can tell that's probably how the movie is. Like the movie's in trouble if they're going to show you
Yes.
all the good parts in the trailer. Although then you got like Marvel's show the way they build their trailers, and they've kind of, I don't know if they've been criticized for it or not, but people definitely realize that they're playing to the audience in some case with the trailers to like
Mm,
sort of lead them in one direction of where the movie's going, and everyone's sort of gone used to this now, where they're thinking when they see a Marvel trailer, it's like they're telling us that it's going this direction, but I think it's something else. There's something else going on
right.
here, where they're now becoming a little more savvy to it. But Marvel did do a good job with that in the early days of making you think they're telling you what the movie is, and then finding out later it's actually a little different than what you expected.
Yeah. Do you think like part of the it's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, like I mentioned before, was kind of the prevalence of superhero movies, what you think made them so popular and relatable for people, and then why they are falling out of favor now. And I guess the part of the instigating question here is, do you think that aspect where they did that with the trailers and it worked at first, but then they kept doing that same thing. People like grew accustomed to it. They learned how to predict it kind of thing. Do you think that's one of the reasons why people became less interested in them? Is
I
it
I don't think that's really the reason for it. I think part of the reason for it now is there's just so much more content out there available, and it seems like it'll take Marvel for example, because when Disney Plus came into being, and they've announced that they're going to have all this on like streaming shows for Marvel that would in a way fit in with the movie universe, but it just felt like they're sort of stretching themselves thin, and then with still their big heavy schedule of movie releases. Also, I found like once they did the movie Endgame, where they had, from Iron Man to Endgame was a well thought out, not necessarily maybe well thought out plan entirely, because if you look at from Iron Man to the first Avengers movie, that was their goal. How do you go from this
right?
movie of like this B kind of character from the comic books to the Avengers? And that was Thanos was nothing to do with that.
Right.
Had no plan in there yet. There was no like great overall plan to get to Endgame. It was to get to just that first Avengers movie. And
There
if they
was
could
no end game.
no, and if they could pull off that first Avengers movie, they were like, ecstatic. And they
Yeah.
did. They pulled it off. They made it where you can take all these big stars, or actually they weren't even really big stars except for Robert Downey Jr., because Chris Hemsworth became a star because of Thor.
And even Robert Downey Jr., like his career had been in a slump for a long time because of his personal issues.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But he was always still a go-to actor. Like, even with his personal issues, people still hired him for movies like Chaplin, where he
I don't
got
actually know what Chaplin is. What's it about?
Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, okay. Yes, I
Back
do
in the
know what
90s.
Chaplin is.
And that was also like in the midst of him having a lot of, I call them personal issues, I guess, personal demons he was battling.
Yeah.
And it just kind of kept growing that he would sort of, you'd think like, oh, he's maybe past that. And now he's got, look at these few movies he's got. And then you'd hear in the news, oh, yeah, he's serving. He's in jail again or been arrested again for whatever this time. But then, yes, he did Iron Man. But Iron Man, I actually saw this article recently that it wasn't necessarily Iron Man that saved his career. It was the movie Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which he did before it, which when he did that, it got people thinking about him again.
Okay.
And so I think it was Jon Favreau who came up with the idea of like bringing him on to Iron Man. But apparently he also had to like make certain agreements that, he would stay clean.
Like a morality clause kind of thing.
Things like that, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense if he's trying to be a superhero that they're like, I mean, the most, I guess, ridiculous comparison there would be like Captain America as a superhero. He is like the picture of what it is supposed to be like an ethical, moral human being that's always doing the right thing, right? Like their version of Superman kind of deal. So if you're trying to build a team of superheroes that are supposed to be larger than life and above reproach and like uncorruptible, you don't want that person to end up in the news every other week for
But it was kind of a good choice to choose him. I mean, to have him play Tony Stark.
Oh, absolutely. There's not another actor on the planet that would be a better Tony Stark.
But also with his past, because even though in the comic books they played it up a lot more about his alcoholism, where they had a whole storyline on that lasted probably over a year in the comic books.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was back in like, was it the early 80s? I remember I used to collect comics back then, and it was one of the storylines. His alcoholism was a huge thing. And so to have him do this, even though they totally glossed over it in Iron Man 2, they kind of show him a bit of that, a little bit of the Playboy drinking, whatever, in the first movie. But then they sort of started getting to the idea that, oh, maybe he's got a drinking problem. But then they sort of like tossed it aside and just went on with the rest of the movie once they kind of got past that whole like weird party thing he was doing in his house with the Iron Man suit and all the people there. And yeah, so that was a big storyline. So to have Robert Downey Jr. do it, at least he sort of has that background. The knowledge in his head
helps him connect with the character on a deeper level.
A bit, yeah. And so really Tony Stark was never meant to be the moral center of any.
I mean, that's very true.
Kind of
like there was a
team.
period where his character in the comic books was so disliked they like killed him off and rebooted him, right?
Well, yeah, but if you look at the comic books back in the 80s and 90s, how many they killed off pretty much every single superhero at one point who always come back.
That's very true. Which, I mean, it kind of feels like they've started doing that in the cinematic universe to a degree. Like they kill off a character or they kill off like one of the franchises and then they replace it with another one, and it feels very much like how it happened in the comic books where they just keep rebooting the things over and over again, and every time they do it they're losing a little bit of their fan base because their stories are getting like more outlandish, or like they don't pull into the old storylines that people liked as well, or they don't connect with the other superhero comics as well, kind of thing.
Right.
The one that always stands out to me the most is that like DC got so convoluted that they like stripped it down like 2 different times until they had like just 52 heroes left because they had so many different streams going at one point.
Well, yeah, I was collecting comics in the 80s when they did the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was to sort of realize we've got too many heroes, like too many big storylines, so they tried to strip it back to like combining it. A few people got killed off. Barry Allen was killed off. Supergirl died in that, and yeah, they tried to bring it all back to almost being just like one Earth, but it expanded again.
Yeah.
Where they had to do it again.
Power creep is strong.
Yeah. I mean, I get what they're trying to do because, the history of DC Comics going back in the 60s when it was born, of DC Comics, not those superheroes. They had all these superheroes from that dated back to the 30s and 40s, like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. and even some other side ones like Shazam, who was originally called Captain Marvel. But when they decided to relaunch him in the 60s, Marvel had already come into existence and copyrighted the name Marvel.
Okay.
So they had to change the name
Huh.
from Captain Marvel to Shazam. Yeah. So they had all these characters, but the difference between Superman when they brought him back into DC Comics in the I guess it was the early 60s, his name was spelled, Kal-El was spelled differently than it was in his original form.
Why?
No idea. Someone just changed it. They put a hyphen in the middle of it. They also gave him some slightly different powers. Kryptonite became a thing, like the green kryptonite thing.
Kryptonite wasn't a thing before that?
No.
Because I know
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of these things that we think of Superman now. Even Superman originally, when he was first invented, he didn't fly. He leapt tall buildings.
in a single band?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
But they added in the flying bit.
Yeah.
Because it's more dynamic.
Yes. And especially like kind of like going to the original intention for Superman to be this like absolutely larger than life, like I don't want to call him a human because he's like not human, but calling him a creature doesn't quite feel.
He's a person.
Yeah, okay, he's a person, larger than life person, that is supposed to represent like all of the most ridiculous like superhuman feats that a person could consider. Like it kind of makes sense that he could. Well, I mean, it doesn't make sense, but I guess what I'm saying is that for him to have that ridiculous set of powers, like given what they were trying to convey with him as a message and like a story and using him for motivation and encouragement and inspiration, like it made sense to make him so much larger than life. But then at what point does that become too much where because like eventually when they kill him off with Doomsday and then they bring him back to life, his power gets absolutely, it's like cut in half compared to what it was because they've introduced more weaknesses and now he's not as physically strong as he used to be. He doesn't have as many of these minor powers that kind of, it's like every superhero has powers that make their powers work, right? Like Flash is resistant to friction. Otherwise, there's no way he'd be able to run as fast as he can because he would just like spontaneously combust all the time. So when they brought back Superman, all of a sudden he had way more weaknesses. He wasn't as impervious as he used to be. So
that makes sense.
At what point does like power creep become too much power creep in these comic books, or like?
No idea, because they're always trying to create some new hero that's more powerful than the last. And I mean, if you look at a character like Deadpool, who has a overactive healing ability, like you see in, I know they do it in the movies where it's like, oh, he's just a head now, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
He can basically be blown apart, and oh look, he's got baby legs now, and
yeah,
where they made a whole joke about that. How do you kill Deadpool? How is he not the most powerful being now?
Well, there's at least one stream of the Marvel comics where he is, because it's like the storyline of Deadpool kills the Marvel universe or something. They did a mini launch or mini series of where he like jumps around between the multiverses and kills like every other hero. And because he's, like you said, basically unkillable, he ends up being the strongest, even though I'm not really sure how he kills some of the other ones that are basically unkillable. But
well, that's it. And you got Wolverine too. It's like kind of a similar situation of being his healing power and then his healing factor, and then he's got adamantium laced bones.
Well, and depending on
so you can't cut through them.
Yeah, depending on which like storyline you're going down. Like there's one comic series where he is literally like at the nuclear warhead when it explodes, and because there's like a single cell left of his DNA, he regrows.
Oh, okay.
And that's like, what? For starters, being that close to a nuke, how is there any cells left?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they just need to keep coming up with new things to make it look like, but.
And then there's some streams where apparently Deadpool's healing factor is stronger than Wolverine's. So like, is Deadpool more invincible than Wolverine?
I guess it just depends on who's writing the comic book at the time.
Yeah,
because it does seem to change a lot with these. A lot of the comic books that are out now, I've never read. because I was collecting back in the 80s and into the early 90s. So I think one of the last series I read was The Death of Superman. I didn't read anything of his resurrection. I know he came back. I know there was actually like 3 or 4 different super people,
Yeah, there
supermen.
was like Superboy, Crypto
Yeah.
the Super Dog, some robot thing, and then
And they were all variations on him, but they weren't
Yeah.
him. And then they finally brought him back.
yeah, they like fused together, and then it
Yeah.
was him or some
But
weird thing.
I didn't really follow that part of the storyline. I followed pretty much up to the death, and that was around the time I stopped collecting comics. Mostly because they were all getting to be repetitive, and oh look, another hero's dead.
Kind of like
and
the movies.
kinda. I think that's also going back to the movies. That's kind of why people are getting a little tired of it. Is that they're formulaic?
Mm-hmm.
Because I do remember in the '80s with comic books when I was collecting X-Men, there was the whole Follow the Mutant storyline, which basically killed off most of the mutants, all the mutants that you loved and cared about. But then within the next year, they were all showing back up again. They weren't dead. They just had amnesia, and it's like, but you died. But Storm is alive again within a year. So, and then it kind of happened again where, oh, we're going to kill off a whole bunch of people. And then a year later, oh, look, here they all are again in comic book form. Here's your story.
That is definitely something from the movies that, like, it lowers the stakes because you know that they're not actually dead or they're gonna come back or something.
Well,
like
that's the
that.
thing with the movies now, especially when they started talking about the multiverse in the Marvel movies or even in the DC movies, because they've talked about it there too.
Yep.
It's like, okay, so you can kill off somebody, but here they are 2 movies later because multiverse.
Yeah.
It's a different version, sure, you can argue it that way. Because even the TV series Arrow kind of did that, where when I was on it, we had a character who got killed off. Spoiler alert. Not really. And then she came back, I think it was a few episodes later, but as Earth 2's version of the character who she was a villain.
Oh, yeah, the Laurel. Yeah.
Yeah. Black Canary, basically. So then she came back in as a Black Siren. And then eventually she was in it enough that she kind of had her turn and became among the heroes again.
Right.
But, they kill her off, and it's like, well, we can still bring her back. Because
yes.
multiverse. Earth 2, in this case.
Definitely something that creates an amount of detachment from the story, I think, because it takes away the stakes, right? And like every time I talk to someone about what they liked the most about Endgame or the Infinity War saga was that it felt powerful because it felt like there were stakes.
Yes.
Because it felt like the heroes could be defeated, could be killed, that there wasn't a lot of hope, and no one had any idea how they were going to beat Thanos. And kind of since that point, every time it doesn't feel like they have those same boundaries to work in, because every time the hero is going to like find the MacGuffin, defeat the bad guy, or the hero is going to overcome their internal struggle and get like twice the power they had before, kind of thing.
There's no stakes once you introduce like the multiverse. Because I don't know if you saw the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness movie, where they had that big reveal of, oh look, here's Professor X, and here's Reed Richards, and here's Black Bolt, and and Captain I can't remember her name. Was it not Captain England, but Peggy Carter. Anyways, Peggy Carter in basically her captain uniform, and but you see them all get wiped out in like a 5-minute space, but that's not really them, because again, multiverse, right? There's infinite amount of worlds out there, which in whatever movies are coming up next, I guess in the next Avengers movies, they could all show up again, but it'll be a different version of themselves. They'll be the other Earth's version of themselves. In the same way that online they're rumoring that, oh yeah, Tony Stark could come back, and should they bring him back? And it's like, yeah, they could bring him back, sure, multiverse, right? But should they?
If they bring him back, they're going to undo the only remaining powerful thing that they did from the Endgame series.
Well, that's the thing. That's kind of why, for me, it's like, even though I haven't been turned off completely from Marvel or anything, but those first, like, 15 years of movies.
Wow, was it that long, too? Wow.
Or less? 10?
I think it was less. I think it was around 10, yeah, because the first Iron Man was probably
longer.
around 2008.
Oh, right, because it was 2019 was Endgame. So, yeah, so about 11 years of movies, of stories that built up to this final gigantic comic book, which is what I loved about it. Because you watch that movie and go, this is a comic book. This is
Very
what
much
this is what
so,
I've wanted to
yeah.
see. With the whole page spread of every single character out there you
Yeah,
can ever dream of.
the little
Uh,
slow-mo scene of them jumping at
yeah.
each other.
But yeah, there were stakes in that one, and we saw like what happens without a multiverse in there. But now they've introduced that, so there's no more stakes for it. Anyone can live, anyone can die, and they can all just come back the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a slightly different version, but still.
How do you feel about the comparison between the multiverse, how they're doing it in Marvel versus DC with their Flashpoint now that they've introduced that?
Well, yeah, you say they now introduced that, but that's part of the old DCEU, not necessarily the James Gunn era of
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's starting the James Gunn era,
Superman Legacy.
which isn't out yet, right? Okay.
No, they don't start filming till next year.
Oh, is it? Who's playing Superman? Is it still?
They cast somebody, some young guy. They have the cast out online. I don't remember. I've never even heard of the
Let's look
person.
it up.
Yeah.
Are they moving away from Henry Cavill just because they're dropping the whole previous?
No idea. It's whatever James Gunn. He hasn't really, I think, explained it to anybody because he doesn't want to and doesn't care to, as to why he is. I get why he's moving away from like what they had started building up with Zack Snyder, and then they even abandoned Snyder and had, kind of left him in the dust, I guess.
Did he do Flashpoint?
No, he had nothing to do with it.
Okay. So that was just like a transition. They were like, all right, this was already in the pipeline. I guess we should finish it.
There was just like the new Aquaman movie is, right? It was something that was already
I didn't
pre-planned
even know there
before.
was one coming out.
Yeah, it's been talked about for a while. It's finally coming out. It comes out, I guess, I think in December. I saw the trailer again recently.
Especially between those two, like that's got to be hard hitting because like with Flashpoint, Ezra Miller recently in the last few years has started to have a lot of drama surrounding him. He's become a less popular actor. And then in terms of Aquaman, it had Amber Heard, who has also come out to be like absolutely batshit.
Yeah.
So that has to hurt their.
I don't know how much of it. I mean, there's obviously some kind of rumors online about how, they've cut out Amber Heard from Aquaman by like a lot of scenes, and then James Wan's come out saying, no, actually, she wasn't really featured in this movie because it's not about her. So her character's actually in it as much as they originally planned for it to be in it.
Which is just not much.
Right. But there's also the other side saying, oh, no, they've cut all her scenes except for maybe like 2 or 3 or whatever it is. They cut her down by like half because of all this drama. It's like, apparently not. So I don't know who you believe in that case unless you actually ever get to see a full-on
right
work print version of this movie.
Get your hands on the raw footage.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows what they've really done. But I can see where, according to the trailers when I watch it, it's not really about her character. It's mostly about him and his brother. And that's it.
Okay.
And Black Manta.
Black Manta. When does that one come out?
I think it's December.
Oh, soon.
I mean, I just saw the trailer last week. And yeah.
I will have to watch that trailer.
It looks like the first movie.
Okay.
So if you like the first movie, you'll probably like this one. If you thought the first movie was a little too goofy, you'll probably think this one's a little too goofy too, because the trailer makes it look kind of goofy.
I like goofy superhero movies, honestly. Like that was actually one of the biggest saving graces, I think, to Thor: Love and Thunder for me.
Right.
Because like from what I heard, a lot of people did not like that movie very much. But for me, honestly, I was expecting it to be like on the ground. So it came in much above my expectations.
Well, when you're going in with that low expectations.
Yeah, Phase 4 of the Marvel Universe just really didn't do it for me.
No.
I remember at some point, like it was towards the end of it, they were wrapping it up, and I was having a conversation with one of my friends about like Phase 4 is over already. What did they even put out in Phase 4? And then he's like, actually, Phase 4 was by far the largest phase of anything that they put out. Like, it was larger in combination than Phases 1, 2, and 3 put together. There was like 46 shows and movies or something in that phase. And I started reading the lists of all of them, and I was like, I recognize like 5 of these names, and those names that I recognize, there was like 2 movies that I actually enjoyed.
Right. Yeah, I know. I can't even really think of all. I know I saw all the movies that came out, and probably seen all the Disney Plus series, but most of them, like I was flipping around Disney Plus just yesterday, and I came across Hawkeye under, because Christmas coming up, so they have all your Christmas movies, and Hawkeye was there, and I went, oh right, that show. I totally forgot about that one.
They're like,
Because they're kind of largely forgettable in a way,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the problem with some of the stuff, is that there's too much content, and it's all very sort of thin storylines, and they're just not as memorable as some of the other ones they've done in the past.
yeah.
Not sure why exactly. Like, they're just not as interesting necessarily.
I feel like to at least some degree, the sheer amount of content they put out was like it numbs the audience to
Yeah.
like the genre on the whole, because especially when they keep it formulaic, even if not every one is formulaic, if 50% of them are formulaic, somebody is going to watch that and their brain is just going to automatically put the formula together, and they're going to be like, okay, now all of these are the same. And then you probably wouldn't give other ones a fair chance in the future because you're now thinking that they're all the same.
Yeah, pretty much. But I guess that happens with anything that's franchise.
Yeah.
They have to follow a certain. They create a certain formula to make it all recognizable. Whether it's it's obviously right down to the storytelling, but it's right down even to the music, the soundtracks to these things, where largely you probably couldn't even hum one of their theme songs anymore, except for, you go back to like the classic days. Go back to like Star Wars or even Jaws, any of the John Williams stuff. You could probably hum most of his music, even if you can't remember exactly which movie it came from. You probably, or as soon as you hear it, you know it. But you can probably play like the theme song from Doctor Strange, and you would never know it was from that movie. It could be from any Marvel movie.
The one, like the only one that jumps out at me that I can think of is literally from the start of Thor Ragnarok, when it's Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
Same thing with me for that one, and also with the Eternals, because the Eternals had their, like, at the very beginning, they had this big battle scene on the beach that takes place like, what, about 20,000 years in the past or something like that, or whatever it was. And then when you see the characters come and meet the primitive man and shake their hands, all of a sudden you hear this music coming over, and it's Pink Floyd's Time. And it's just like the opening drum and percussion beat with the guitar sort of like slowly coming in, until finally it goes into the whole drum of dun 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 dun. And you hear David Gilmour coming in saying, "Digging away." And it sort of fades out as to modern day London. And it's like, that stuck in my mind because, well, I like Pink Floyd. But it's also, it's that drum beat, right? It's the music to it that really kind of connects with you.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the others, it's obviously different from, just like, Ragnarok with Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song playing there.
Yes.
That is a very striking song.
Especially compared to kind of like what they had built up for people to expect kind of as soundtracks for these movies. Like, not that wouldn't be a song that they would use in something like Iron Man, because they definitely used a lot of rock songs in Iron Man too, but just like the delivery of it in that scene with Thor in that fight, like, I don't know, something about that scene was just magical with that song. It worked so well, especially with the song like basically being about Vikings. Like,
yeah, I know it matched. I think for years people were like trying to figure out like, when you're gonna have this song in there, because it's about Vikings.
You just need to bring in
and finally,
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, finally they decided to pony up the cash to Led Zeppelin to get the licensing rights to it, because they're not cheap for those guys.
I mean, if anyone can afford it, it's Marvel.
Yeah. There's a few bands out there where their licensing is so expensive to deter just anybody wanting to use their music.
What are some of the other bands?
The Beatles music is one. I remember when Mad Men.
So the entire movie Yesterday must have been expensive.
Probably. Or they might have actually made a bigger deal with them, with Danny Boyle, because of the lower budget movie.
Okay.
And how much music they were going to use in it. But I remember when Mad Men wanted to use a song from Revolver, because apparently the episode took place when Revolver came out in the 60s. And and specifically, it's like, I think it was Don Draper buys the album, specifically this album, and they had to play this song on it. I can't remember which song it was, but it cost them like about $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
For one song?
Yeah.
Oof.
Licensing rights, right? And Led Zeppelin's the same. Pink Floyd's the same. Because they just don't want their music out there. They want to control it. So Marvel can do that, which is actually pretty impressive, because with a show like Legion, which was a Marvel show, but it was Marvel 20th Century Fox Marvel, used 2 Pink Floyd songs, one in season 1, and then they did a whole-on cast rendering of the song Mother in the final season.
Huh.
I think it's in the second to last episode or last episode. And it's like a 5-6 minute song, and they did the full version of it with the cast singing
Does it cost any less for them to be covering it with the cast, or they still
No,
have
I
to pay
think
the full?
I think it's still the same licensing rights for it, probably. I can't imagine it would be any different. But it's pretty impressive that they did that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I love it when movies integrate music in, or shows integrate music in, which is actually kind of funny because when I was a kid, I did not like musicals.
Oh, no?
I have only recently started to develop an appreciation for musicals.
Yeah, I'm not a huge musical fan, but, I'll go see one once in a while. Go see one.
I think
So,
honestly, Disney animated cartoon movies are what made musicals kind of grow on me, and a little bit Sweeney Todd.
That's funny. I don't think I was ever really a huge fan of it's not why I would go see a Disney movie back in the 80s or when I was a kid.
I mean, definitely not in the 80s because I didn't actually.
You didn't
as
exist.
a kid, I'm not sure. Well, yeah, I didn't. As a kid, I'm not sure I even really recognized how much singing was in a lot of Disney movies.
Yeah, I don't. Well, they're not nearly as much as some of the Andrew Lloyd Webber type musicals or even Rodgers and Hammerstein type musicals.
Yeah.
They're definitely more spread out through it, and it's more of a highlight moment.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the music itself doesn't necessarily push the full story forward. Whereas in most musical plays you go see, the music and songs are pushing everything forward.
Right. It is literally
with a
progressing
little
the
bit of
story.
dialogue in between.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, now that we've talked about superheroes for a very long period of time, I would love to ask you, what does creativity mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Good question. I don't know if I can answer that. What does the creativity mean to me? I don't know. I mean, I know what it's like. I know what it is to be creative in a sense, but it also depends on what you're doing, because if you're doing music, creativity. If you're just working out a plan to build a structure, it's creative. It's kind of a, I guess creativity is kind of a broad, could be broad, because you can become creative thinking, creative solutions is not necessarily making a painting or a sculpture or a movie. It could be anything that takes your imagination and gets whatever you're thinking out there into the world.
Applied application of imagination. Yeah, very much so. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of people have a hard time reconciling themselves as creative because they don't think of themselves as having the more traditionally creative skills, like being a singer or a musician of some sort, or
Well,
an
exactly.
artist or whatnot. But I mean, like you said, and touching on creativity and problem solving, like we talked about earlier, there's creativity in almost every aspect of life.
Yeah.
And something I'm curious, in your life, in your day to day and whatever hobbies you have, how much of an influence do you think creativity has in your day to day life? And what are your hobbies, some of your hobbies, and do you consider them creative or not?
Well, I definitely consider one of my hobbies to be creative, because I learned to play the guitar, and for the last 13 years I've been learning to play the guitar. It took me a while to actually decide to do it, but when I finally did, it was about 13 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. Especially whenever I can. Like right now, so, with work sort of being a little
The
sporadic
film
at the moment.
strike, yeah, it's a great time to
I've been
reignite hobbies.
I've been playing a lot more. It's just usually for myself. I mean, yes, my wife can hear it, but I usually just it's more or less for myself to sort of have, I guess, in a way, a creative output. Something a little different.
I mean, creative outputs are very important.
Photography used to be something I used to do a lot more of than I do now, but I still do it when I go, if I see something that I need to take a picture of for whatever reasons.
Have you ever done red room photography?
No.
No, I did. In grade 11, I tried to take an accounting elective, and there were not enough kids I had recently moved to Quesnel, which is in northern BC, and the school was less than half the size of the school that I had come from. So they didn't actually have enough kids sign up for accounting because it turns out in a small town, nobody wants to take accounting. And so they made me pick a new elective to fill that time slot with. And I ended up, like, one of the only things that was left was photography. So I ended up taking photography.
What do you mean by red room photography? You mean
Like-
like dark room? Like
Yeah.
processing your own film?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did that when I was like in grade 6.
In grade 6.
Yeah, my elementary school had like an after school program. There was, I think, 3 or 4 of us that were in there. That was when I first started doing it. I didn't do it at all in high school, but that's when I first got a taste for it. And then when I graduated high school, went to Cégep in Montreal. I took a photography course as one of my electives. And I took 2 years, took photography 1 and photography 2. So basically 2 semesters worth, and it was all darkroom, like going out with your black and white photography photographs, and
It's remarkably fun.
it is, especially going into the darkroom was always fun. Even though it's not dark, it's red, except that you had to either step in a black box, or was it a black box? Yeah, we had to step in like a darkened closet to load the film into the canisters, which the first time you're doing it's like, what? And it's just like going all over the place. But once you get used to it, it's like, there you go, in the thing, out the door, put your chemicals in, have fun, sit back for a bit.
Yeah, and it's like, it almost felt like it gave a similar, I guess maybe like serotonin or dopamine rush as I have recently discovered that cooking for myself does. Like,
right.
Just something about like taking the base ingredients and then creating something. It brings joy and peace.
No, I know. Yeah, cooking for yourself is actually quite fun.
I've noticed a lot of people in the film industry actually, like I'll be having a conversation with like a grip at the grip stash or something, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm a huge hobby chef. I've got like $4,000 knives. Here are the things that I made last weekend. And it's like, this conversation has happened more than once. Why are there so many hobby chefs in film?
I remember when I was on Arrow, there was a PA who was working for me who, he had to be like, I think 20 at the time. And him and I got into a whole conversation about kitchen knives, like about sets of kitchen knives. And cooking and all that kind of stuff.
Did he have the fancy Japanese kitchen knives?
Yeah, he had a pretty nice set.
Yeah.
I mean, we have I think like a $700 knife set at home. Nice, balanced, sharp.
I mean,
great.
A good knife set does make a big difference if you cook a lot.
It does, because I remember when I first moved out from living with my parents and moved across the country, and obviously the first knives I got were what I could afford at the time, being a student with not much money. And it's amazing how fast really cheap knives, even if you try to keep them sharp, they still dull quickly and they rust very fast. Like, all of a sudden you start seeing little rust marks on them, no matter how much you try to like just keep them dry, wash them, dry them. They're just terrible. You get a good set. Once you can finally afford one, it's like, wow, this is like stays sharp for like more than 2 or 3 cuts.
Especially trying to cut like a loaf of bread or like a turkey or something with one of those cheap knives after it started to dull, because the blades they feel thinner. So even if you sharpen them, they dent and they dull way faster. You hit a turkey bone and it's like already dulled again, and you're like, man, this is useless.
Yeah, I know. So there's having a good knife set is important to be in the kitchen. But I wouldn't necessarily call myself a hobby chef, because it depends on the timing, right? Like, when I'm working a lot, it's not like so much you can really spend much time in the kitchen. It's like when you're not working, when you have those like couple of weeks, or in this case,
I think that's probably what surprised me so much about it, was that like people in film don't tend to have a lot of time at home to cook. So for there to be so many people that were so passionate about cooking when they were at home had kind of taken me off guard.
I was surprised to find out how many people I know really got into baking. And not just because of like back during the pandemic or anything, just in general, they've been baking for a while. They just really get into baking and making elaborate cake designs, and have really gone into, or making much more complex desserts than just, say, like throwing a cake in the oven or a couple of muffins here and there. But yeah, it's kind of weird. Or how many people are like obsessed with watching stuff like the Great British Baking Show or the Great Canadian Baking Show and going, I have to make that, which I did do once, actually, last 2 years ago. My wife and I were watching one, and I saw them make this thing, and I went, I got to make that. And I did. And it was some Icelandic cake. And I made it for Christmas.
Nice.
There you go. And it's like, okay, well, I've accomplished that. I'm moving on now. What else got to make?
I feel like there's almost some kind of an age-related thing to appreciation of the Food Network. Like when I was younger,
Yeah.
my parents, like it would just be like either the Food Network or like Home and Garden Television are on in the background all the time kind of thing. And like my grandparents' house, similar deal. Like older people when I was younger would just always have either like the Home and Garden Network, History Network, or the Food Network on,
Right.
just on in the background. And literally last night, I was walking around Port Moody, and in a bunch of the new like apartment complexes that they've thrown up around here, they've got a bunch of like ground level suites and stuff right now. So I like walking around, I just happened to notice like TV through the window, right? And having ADHD, it's like almost impossible not to look at a flickering screen as you're walking past it. So I glanced at the screen and I noticed there was like 4 people watching the Food Network.
Yeah. A lot of those food shows have become huge over the years. I mean, they didn't even exist when I was growing up. I mean, we didn't have Food Network or History Channel or anything, right? It was just your typical CBC, CTV, ABC, NBC, CBS. And if you got a food show on, it was usually like on something like either CTV or CBC in that 1 hour spot between the news and, whatever soap opera was coming on after that.
Oh, soap operas, man.
So, and same with the garden shows. There's a garden show probably on like a Saturday in between Saturday morning cartoons and hockey, somewhere like that. That was your whole thing. No channel based on that. So,
And now
yeah,
there's a channel for almost every niche.
there is, and it's kind of crazy
Yes.
because at one point when I had cable, we had so many of these channels and never watched them because they just end up getting lumped into a package of something where, oh, I want these 2 channels, but here's 10 more that you'll never watch.
Yes, that is the worst. I mean, that's why one of the reasons, at least, why streaming took off so much in the first place is no one wanted to pay $150 a month for a TV package when you only watch 3 channels in it.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, $10 a month to watch or to have access to on demand, like hundreds of shows, whatever you want, it makes way more sense.
Yeah.
And then somehow Netflix forgot the reason that everyone decided that they were better than television and started to implement everything that people hated about television.
Oh, you mean like commercials?
Commercials and like waiting week to week to
Oh.
release their content instead of like releasing a whole season or half a season at once.
It's interesting you should say that because I liked the idea that, oh, hey, here's the whole show and I can watch it at leisure. Either watch it all in one weekend or if you really want to, all in one day, if it was short enough, or over a span of a week, or compared to the 1 week thing. Whereas I have friends who got used to that binging, but then when Disney Plus came along and went, okay, we're going to release like The Mandalorian, here's your 1 episode for the week. And they actually started liking that because they said it was actually refreshing, where you had that old school sort of that old feeling of anticipation for the next episode, which we all grew up with when you watch network television, going, "How this ended on a cliffhanger? I must know how it ends. I must know how they complete this storyline, but I got to wait a week."
I found that it also made it easier to remember this, like what happened in each distinct episode became easier to remember because the episodes don't bleed together like they do when you just watch 6 episodes in a row.
Yeah.
So like since I got Netflix in like 2016 or something and started binging shows more regularly, I started remembering them much less than when I would just watch them week to week when they'd come out on an airing schedule.
Well, that's the problem too, I find with binging. Like my wife and I just binged because we'd never seen it. It was a show, Homeland. And since all 8 seasons were on Disney Plus, we had the time, so decided to watch them. And I can remember the storylines for the whole 8 seasons. I just can't remember which season it was. When did that happen again? And we just watched it. It's just that, because they all just bleed. When you do it that way, that just one just bleeds right in through each other. And
Yeah.
in some cases, you kind of think, oh, yeah, she did. No, that was actually that way. And that was previous. And right. Okay. Yeah, we binged that in The Americans recently. We got on a whole like CIA, KGB. Now we're struggling to find another show.
Do you want another spy one? There's the
Don't mind.
Jack Ryan,
Oh,
the
Reacher.
Amazon one.
Jack Ryan. Oh, Jack Ryan, right.
Jack Ryan
Yeah.
is with John Krasinski, and then there's Reacher that
Reacher.
has that other guy who was in Fast 10 and also Blue Mountain State. I don't know his name, but he's a tall blonde Jack dude.
Right. I've heard that show's actually better than the Tom Cruise movie. Or it's more faithful to the book.
I
Which
think I
never
would
read.
agree with that. I've read, I think, one, maybe two Reacher books. My uncle liked them, so
Right.
like when I was younger, a lot of my books just came from his shelf. And he's read like every whodunit spy novel that you could ever imagine, kind of thing. His basement is just full of boxes of them.
Right.
And one of the first things that stuck out to me in describing Reacher in these books is that he's supposed to be like 6'3" or 6'4" and just like absolutely jacked, like
Right.
huge. Tom Cruise is not Tom Cruise is fit. Don't get me wrong. That dude is in great shape, but he is not like Dwayne Johnson big.
He's also not 6'3".
Yeah.
But
He's not even
camera
6 foot with
trickery, and
boots on.
you'll never guess.
Whereas this other guy, he has a much more intimidating presence on set, which makes him feel more like the Jack Reacher described in the book.
Right. Yeah. I guess the show I should catch up on. Try it out.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the John Krasinski, the
Jack Ryan
ones. Those two are too close together for Amazon to have released them both.
Right. Yeah, I really like the Hunt for Red October, like the movies with Jack Ryan. So yeah, I kind of figured the show would probably be something similar. Pretty much the same.
I haven't actually seen the movies.
You never saw Hunt for Red October?
No.
Oh, you got to see that one. That's a classic.
I know it's a classic. I've actually had another friend of mine tell me that I have done myself a great disservice for not watching it and that I need to watch it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely that's a good one.
I didn't know that was a Jack Ryan story.
Yeah, Alec Baldwin plays Jack Ryan in that one. And then
interesting.
when they did the second one, Harrison Ford was hired. I'm not sure like why. Maybe Alec Baldwin wasn't available or whatever, but they changed the character. Well, didn't really change it, but they Harrison Ford did 2 movies as Jack Ryan.
And now they're both going to appear in the next multiverse iteration from DC.
Are they?
No.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well,
Harrison Ford's in a Marvel one coming up.
Is he really? I can't believe he's still making
Which one is he
movies.
in?
He is so old now.
I think he's in the new Captain America movie.
Really?
I think. He's in one of them coming up because they made a big deal that Harrison Ford's going to be in the Marvel Universe now. Playing, I don't know what he's playing. Probably some military. Oh, I think he's replacing William Hurt, who played Ross, General Ross.
Okay.
I think that's who he's replacing because William Hurt passed away.
Mm.
But they want to keep the character. And
Right.
who are you going to replace him with, right? Why not Harrison Ford? But yeah, he's in his 80s, but he can play a general.
I mean, I was surprised to see. I mean, he probably didn't do his stunts the way that he used to, but in the new Indiana Jones movie, like, he seems too old to be running around in action movies like that.
Well, as long
Good for him
if
for
he can
doing
do
it.
yeah, yeah, I know. Well, they did sort of tailor that one to the fact that he's not, in his 40s anymore.
That's true. They
Ex-
brought the multiverse aspect into that movie too.
Yeah. Actually,
When-
the de-aging in that wasn't so bad. It looked good, but it was weird hearing his voice, his 80-year-old voice, coming out of like his like 40-year-old something
Yeah.
body. That threw me for a minute. It's like, okay, well, it's great they got him to dub it, but at the same time, it just sounds a little off.
Mm-hmm.
But not enough to really take me out of it too much.
What's your opinion on them, like, rebooting their reboot attempt with Indiana Jones after the Shia LaBeouf? Because, like, essentially what they were doing with that movie was they were going to, like, start a franchise with Shia LaBeouf as, like, the new Indiana Jones kind of thing, with him being his son or something. And now with this movie, it feels very much like they're trying to introduce her as the new Indiana Jones replacement. And they just, like, completely, no mention of Shia LaBeouf, wrote that out. Like, that movie did not exist.
He died in Vietnam. They mentioned that in the movie.
Did they?
Yeah, that's why he's
totally
that's why,
missed that
That's why
part.
Marion left him, not because his son died, but because Indy couldn't get over the fact that his son died. So that's why she walked out on him. Or I don't think they actually got divorced. They just they were separated anyways.
Okay.
And but it was a quick mention. There was a picture of him in the apartment, and I think he's wearing his military photo.
Mm.
As he's sitting there drinking, then he goes and yells at the hippies across the way, "Turn your music down, you young kids! Get off my lawn!" All that kind of stuff, right? That scene, yeah, he's basically mourning. He's been mourning his son because he died in Vietnam. Okay, that was the way to get rid of Shia LaBeouf, in a way, to get rid of that character. What was his name?
I don't remember. I honestly, that's probably why
Spike?
I missed the mention. That sounds maybe like it could
Rocco?
be familiar.
I just remember in that the fourth movie, he shows up looking a lot like Marlon Brando with the black cap and the motorcycle jacket, riding the bike, with that black leather cap that's kind of hanging partly down over his eyes. And
very much so. Yep.
That's obviously it's who they're modeling it after. Couldn't get away from it, but yeah. Or James Dean, one of those two.
Shia LaBeouf is an actor that has a very interesting story. Let's say a creative story.
I don't really know much about him.
I don't know it.
And he had some issues.
A ton. But he did a movie called Honey Boy that is supposed to be essentially a recounting of his childhood years where he was being raised by his father to be a child actor. And he plays his father, who is like kind of an abusive alcoholic asshole that's like essentially using his kid for money, like in the child industry sort of thing.
Huh.
I haven't watched the movie yet, but I heard it was a very powerful portrayal because he is like diving into the character of his father, who he held so many resentments towards because of like everything that happened. And perhaps the movie will give me an even greater appreciation, but I definitely built an appreciation for the struggle that he had to go through after like hearing the story behind Honey Boy. Because like almost every child actor ends up being like a little fucked up. I don't think I can think of any that didn't end up in rehab. Besides maybe the Harry Potter crew, I think they turned out like decently all right, even though they've had like, there was some mention of Daniel Radcliffe being a little bit wonky for a little bit there, or just like wonky in the sense that he does weird projects like Swiss Army Man. Like now he's rich forever and just does fun things.
I think that's the way to do it, though. I mean, how do you separate yourself from such a iconic role, or a role that became so iconic like Harry Potter, and you become so associated with that person? Then you just go out there and completely do something different, like that's so completely different than Harry Potter, to get away from it. Like, some of these people, they never get away from those characters, or they never get away from that type of character.
Yes,
like he could have gone on to play another wizard or some kind of magical person in another franchise,
in the fantasy universes. Yeah,
but instead he chose to do some really weird projects, which is, I think, which is good for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like what's his name?
It speaks to him doing it for the love of acting and like creating the art rather than just like doing it for a paycheck kind of thing.
I mean, Robert Pattinson did the same thing. Because obviously Twilight. I mean, he was in one of the Harry Potter movies, and then he was in the Twilight series, and you get almost typecast as sparkly vampire.
Sparkly undead man.
How do you get away from that? Well, go do a David Cronenberg movie for one, and then reinvent yourself in a couple of different roles, like with Willem Dafoe there with The Lighthouse, and then
he
Batman.
did come back. Yeah, does Batman count as him being a vampire sort of still?
Well, he's not sparkly anymore, and he's not trying to suck people's blood, so he's just beating the crap out of everybody.
That was actually, I felt like his Batman portrayal was a little too broody. Like,
yes, I agree with that. I liked it. I get where they come from. He's a young guy still mourning his parents after like 20 years or so. They really wanted to make it dark, almost like what Christopher Nolan had done, but he kind of got away from the broodiness a little more than this one kind of brings it right back to it.
Like
deep into it.
Deep into it and then stays there. Like in the Christopher Nolan ones with Christian Bale, he is dark and broody for a lot of it, but there's the character development where he like he kind of discovers his mission, right? And that
Yeah.
gives him the motivation to help pull himself out of the darkness a little bit.
Well, I guess that was kind of the point of this this movie, was he hadn't quite found his mission yet.
I guess, yeah.
He's become the vigilante. He's taking out his rage on criminals, but he doesn't have a clear necessary mission.
Right.
Except for maybe closer to the end where it's like, oh, I'm going to save Gotham. I have to save Gotham. But who knows? Next movie, we might see something a little different. Maybe he's
We see another different Batman.
Yeah. An evolution of this character.
At this point, how many different Batmans has there been at this point? It's got to be close to 10.
No, going back to like even pre-Adam West, there was a Batman,
There's a pre-Adam West Batman?
black and white TV series. The first person to play Batman.
Because the Adam West one was colored.
Yeah.
Barely, but it was colored.
There was at least one before him, and then Adam West was the last Batman until Michael Keaton
Okay.
that I know of.
But then there was
Other than
Keaton,
cartoon versions that happened in the
Kilmer,
70s.
Clooney. They really like the cuz.
Keaton, Kilmer, Clooney, yeah, they do. Weird.
And then Affleck doesn't quite fit.
No. Well, Christian Bale, Affleck. Although I didn't really mind his performance. I mean, I know there were some people who hated it and other people who really loved it.
I think he made kind of like almost the opposite of Robert Pattinson's, where Pattinson did a really good, like, early broody Batman and like emotionally damaged Bruce Wayne, but Ben Affleck did a really good, like, I am the rich playboy Bruce Wayne.
Well, that's kind of where you see the filmmakers taking their inspiration from. Because the one thing about the superhero movies that I've noticed is that a lot of them, and I think this is why part of their success is, it's with a generation like my generation and maybe Generation X, who all grew up with the late 70s, 80s comic stories. And all the filmmakers that are making stuff like Zack Snyder and Reeve here, who did the last Batman movie, even Christopher Nolan, would have all grown up. They're all like around my age or a little younger in some cases. And they all grew up with the same comic books in the 80s. The Frank Miller series of The Dark Knight Returns, which was a huge sell in the 80s because it took place in the future. It was like a 60-something or 70-something Batman, but he's not Batman. Batman's gone. Bruce Wayne is a race car driving sort of playboy who gave up Batman a while ago. And the Joker's in an insane asylum, but he breaks out, and there's all these other thugs going around, and he finally brings Batman back as a much older person, and it becomes this huge storyline. It was dark, it was gritty, it was violent, and that's what they're all growing up on. They're either taking that one, or they're taking Frank Miller's story, Batman Year One, which is his first year as Batman. So he's, again, brutal, violent.
Right.
There's even one of the comic panels in there where he's using guns. Yeah.
What?
So it's much different. It was Batman in his infancy. Starting out, he was a young...
I have a hard time imagining any Batman using guns, just from the, like, knowing that he came from being trained at the League of Assassins. Like, they don't use guns.
Well, that's more of a modern retelling of it, because the original Batman wasn't necessarily trained by the League of Assassins, because the League of Assassins hasn't been in the comic books since the 40s,
Okay. I thought the League of Assassins was one of the more,
It's become,
at least repeated storylines.
Now it is. It's a lot of the storylines kind of came up through the 70s and all that, like Alfred being a wartime hero.
I've never even heard that.
You see it more in the current movies, where he was a soldier for like the British Marines at one point.
Oh, I also missed that somehow.
Yeah, and it showed up in the comics, but it only kind of started showing up in the 70s, where he had a backstory. Before that, he was just a guy who was Bruce Wayne's manservant, butler. They started giving him a backstory.
Right.
And so that's become a backstory now. And same thing with League of Assassins. It was like not originally Batman's backstory, but it has maybe become it now.
Okay. They decided somewhere that he needed a reason for being good at fighting.
Yeah.
Just like they needed a reason for Alfred to be able to use all of Batman's super technology.
Well, exactly.
Even though a soldier from the 40s wouldn't be able to use supercomputers like that.
And of course, there was the TV series Pennyworth, which really highlights the fact that Alfred was in the military in the 60s, like post-war 60s in England.
Pennyworth.
Oh, you never saw it?
No.
It was on Showcase for a while. It's on one of the streaming services. I think it's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it on.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a crazier retelling of because it's of Alfred Pennyworth when he was before he even met um what's his face Bruce Wayne's father there. What's
Find it interesting that so like there's that show Pennyworth, there's the Gotham show which is about the detectives.
Oh, yeah.
Batman keeps coming up, and whether it's being rebooted or spun off or and like we touched earlier on how many heroes DC has, why are they so reluctant to make something with any other heroes? They just repeat the same like 4 heroes over and over again.
I think a lot of it is just there's really there's the three big heroes of DC Comics, sometimes referred to as the Holy Trinity of DC Comics, and as Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman. They're the big sellers. Green Lantern is not necessarily a big seller.
I mean,
And you don't even have to talk about that movie that came out. Like, forget about the movie. Even as a comic book, he's not a bad character. He's not a bad title. It just wasn't never as big as those guys. Also, I think when they were, especially when Donner made Superman 70, 78, 79, you can make a guy look like he's flying a lot easier than you can make a guy using a thought-based ring to punch someone out with a giant green fist.
that's fair point. Yeah,
That's
it
something
would have
you can
been
do
really
now.
difficult to do Green Lantern,
Which is kind of
then.
why when I think was it Zack Snyder's version of Justice League, where they show the big battle scene that took place sometime in the past, the War of the Mother Box, you see a couple of Green Lanterns in there, and you see him using like the ring weapon, and it looked great because the effects are so much better now than they would.
Mhm.
Imagine this in the 80s, it would have looked really clunky and dumb.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Which I find it a little unfortunate that Green Lantern isn't a more popular hero because the messaging behind like the Green Lantern Corps and like the whole willpower aspect of the Green Lantern and like essentially creating anything that your imagination can muster up with just sheer willpower feels like it is a more relatable and inspirational story than just Superman being born, being basically a god with having all of these amazing superpowers that make him absolutely undefeatable. Whereas, like, the Lantern Corps, they're not undefeatable, but they have almost an infinitely scaling ability as long as they are resolute in their determination for whatever they're trying to do.
Well, yeah, they're a cosmic police force, is what they really are, and that's the Green Lantern Corps was always meant as a cosmic police force. So they have a sense of justice, of right and wrong, whatever that means in a galaxy of like multiple planets, habitable planets that have all their own species. What does justice
Yeah.
mean on any of these planets? There they are
Thousands of
coming around
different-
going, this is what it means, people.
Yeah.
But does it? So they're really always relegated to
It's kind of a
fighting
little
off bigger
analogous
threats.
to America. It's like, hey guys, we're the world police. You got to do things the way that we say to do things.
But isn't that like what most of the stuff is out there?
Kinda, I guess. Yeah.
In at least more modern history?
Do you have examples for us?
Well, you could always look at Star Trek Next Generation and look at the Borg. I know there's like I can't remember who it was. One of the producers of that show way back when I saw an interview with talking about how basically it's like fighting. The Borg is the antithesis to American culture, and they're trying to you fight it to keep it from assimilating to one giant like homogeny.
Huh.
Whereas me watching it, and same thing, I remember my brother and I kind of watching it going, thinking, wow, the Borg, that looks like American culture trying to take over the universe, right? To make everybody like themselves. So
I hadn't looked at Star Trek from that political angle.
everything in Star Trek is basically has a political
I mean,
angle
that's
to it.
that's essentially sci-fi, right? Like
Yeah.
it is social commentary.
Exactly.
So it
It just
makes
depends on how you
sense.
interpret that social commentary. Whereas someone in America would see it that being the Starfleet is America, is the American ideal.
Trying to defend the
A futuristic
universe
American
from
ideal,
the
obviously,
Borg.
because there's no religion in their world anymore, or at least no, basically there's no organized religion. None of them pray to anything. So
Yeah.
they're basically all the same. the Borg's the same thing, but they're trying to take over, whereas Starfleet's going around trying to make friends with everybody. But look at real world politics going back even like long before we were born, and that's not necessarily the case of American foreign policy going in. And they're not necessarily they didn't go into Vietnam going, hey guys, we want to make friends here. How you doing? You know? They didn't go into Iraq in 2003 going, hey, they said, we're coming to liberate you, but no, not really.
Yeah, we're coming to keep the peace.
Exactly. So that's why you can kind of see it from that point of view of if you don't live in America, if you're not brought up as an American, from looking at, especially being in Canada, where we're always looking at American culture, going back as far as television was
especially
beamed into our houses.
Vancouver, because like almost all of the things that we film in Vancouver are American shows that take place in America. They're American stories meant to relate to Americans.
Yeah.
It's like, even the ones, wasn't it you that was telling me you were working on a show that it was supposed to be in Canada and it was supposed to be Vancouver as Vancouver, and then they started to change things so it was like kind of anonymous. You couldn't tell exactly because they were going to air it in America the next season.
I don't know the real reasons for it, but yes, I was working on a show that when I read some of the original outline for it, it said like, we're going to play Vancouver as Vancouver. But when you read the scripts and actually watch it didn't watch the show, but I mean, like when you're watching it filming, there's no mention of the name Vancouver in any scripts that I read or anything like that, right? But they're not hiding the fact that it's Vancouver. They're not like disguising buildings or not trying to, we don't want to look over there because the mountains are there. It's like, we'll see the mountains, no problem. You know, look, there's ocean here. Perfect. There's an island over there. Great. You know, they'll show Stanley Park if they need to show Stanley Park. They won't necessarily call it straight up Vancouver, because even the any official cars in the show, like police cars, didn't say Vancouver on them. So
it's just anonymous city.
But
North
why
America.
why it takes place in Vancouver but doesn't take place in Vancouver is whatever reasons. Maybe maybe it is to show it in the U.S. But then again, the U.S. is not entirely turned off by that kind of thing, because shows like Schitt's Creek, which clearly take place in Ontario, they mention Toronto all the time. They say it's in Ontario. It was a huge hit in the U.S. And going back even further with skit shows like Kids in the Hall was very Canadian humor, and it was a huge hit in the U.S. Mostly with late night college kids smoking a lot of dope, but it was a huge hit. And there are other Canadian shows that have made it.
Do you know if Letterkenny was big in the States? I know it was really popular up here, but I don't know if it made it across the border.
Yeah, I don't know. Never hear anyone talking about that one.
Really?
Yeah, even online, I don't hear anyone really talking about it, other than maybe a few people I know who watch it here.
That show is Canadian gold.
Yeah, I've seen I think I saw the first season of it, and yeah, it's definitely very Canadian.
Especially like having finished my last 2 years of high school in small town like northern BC. I felt like I was living in the same town as that show was taking place. Like between
I've heard a few people
players,
say
the
that.
farmers and the skids. Like yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a few people that I've worked with who've said the same thing, who grew up in like either a small town in Ontario or a small town in Manitoba, or even northern BC, or even in the interior. It's like I don't necessarily relate to these guys because I grew up in a bigger city, and you don't necessarily get that type of guy out there, but. Yeah, for I think people who grew up in those communities, especially in like places like Manitoba or Ontario.
Yeah, 100%.
You definitely get this idea. Like you go, hey, that was my neighbor. That was the guy I went to high school with. But
like in theory, if the content is good and the storytelling is good, I don't think Americans would care very much that it takes place in Canada, just like we don't care very much if something takes place in America, because we're there for the story. We're there for the characters and like how they deliver the story and the characters, and how much like passion essentially they put into the project. The shows that people don't like are the ones that you can tell people like they didn't put effort into making it good. They just like they followed the formula. They were basically just working for the paycheck. They were pushing it through standard studio channels, and there wasn't really a showrunner that was like super passionate about it, kind of thing. One of my favorites, which I have actually kind of recently gone back and tried to rewatch, and it lost a little bit of its luster from when I was watching it as a teenager into my early university years, was the show Continuum. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah. I remember I never watched it though.
It was
It's funny you should say that when you were a teenager because it was while I was working in this industry, it was a show that was filming. I probably know a couple of people that worked on it.
I actually, on my last show, A Million Little Things, I had the fortune of meeting the number one on that show, Rachel Nichols.
Oh yeah.
She was a day player on A Million Little Things, and I didn't realize at first. Me and Carl were trying to sort out. We had to get this actress tested before she, like COVID tested before she came up to play, and uh, for some reason, the site that we sent her to in LA refused to let her through the gate.
Huh.
Even though she had like the confirmation email from us, but it wasn't the confirmation email that they were expecting to see, I guess, because this particular studio had higher security than like literally every other COVID site for
Right.
whatever reason. And after half an hour of like back and forth, like trying to contact people behind the scenes, trying to get her through, trying to get it all cleared and whatnot, she calls us back and she's like, yeah, so I showed them the email that you sent me and they accepted that and let me through. And it's like, oh man. For one, why do they even stop you at the gate if that's all like if that's the security that they're doing? But like me and Carl were so scared because like usually you don't want to leave someone waiting in a car for half an hour, whether they're an actress or not, like regardless of what position they're in. If our job is to get them tested at a specific time, like it doesn't feel good to have to be jumping through these hoops, try to get them in and tested, knowing that they're waiting there for half an hour out of their day kind of thing, right? And she was so nice about it and just like super friendly the whole time, never had a complaint. And then when she came up here and played during one of our testing days, she came in and it's just like absolutely the same, just like such a huge sweetheart, super nice person.
Yeah.
That's the second time I've met an actor from one of my favorite shows growing up, and they ended up just being like one of the nicest people that I've ever had a short interaction with.
Yeah, I've had a couple like that too. That you always remember them.
Yeah, it's nice because like so many times you hear the warning of like don't meet your heroes, right? But
Yeah. No, there is that also. I usually, when it comes to being on set or anything, I don't set out to try to interact with the actors necessarily. You know, if I pass by them, say hi, whatever. But I don't. I know some people kind of go out there and try. Oh, I got to get a picture with them, kind of thing, right? And they gotta like be seen with them, or
I feel like that turns a lot of them away from like even being like if you talk to them and interact with them as if they were another crew member and another human being, they're usually just like cool normal people.
yeah,
But if you like fanboy over them, then they're like less interested in chatting with you.
yeah. I mean, for the most part, I think most of the shows I've ever been on, there's not necessarily been anyone on there that I've necessarily wanted to go and try and talk to.
Mm.
There's been a few, but very, very few. Most of the shows I've been on, it's been like, oh yeah, I just kind of I don't try to bother them. I don't try to go and talk them up for any reason, just to say like, oh, I'm getting to talk to you kind of idea. It's just more like they're here to work. I'm there to work. I'm going to do my job.
Yeah.
So I'll go about my day doing my job. But every now and then, yeah, I got to have a small interaction with a few actors out there who have been great. People who, again, like Sir Ian McKellen, I had a brief conversation with actually on 2 different days, which was for me, back in the early 2000s was fantastic. He had just come off of like the X-Men movies, and also I knew him from other things, and you just know who the guy was, and you realize, yeah, he's a really sweet man. He's a really nice guy.
It is cool
Very
to
friendly.
like, especially at least when you're first getting into the film industry, when you have like you're so used to seeing people on screen, right? Whether it's a movie or TV show or whatnot. Like these people exist, but it never really, at least for me, I couldn't have really cared less about meeting any of them. But it's still kind of a little bit cool to just like be on set with them. Well,
Yeah.
like this is a talented actor that so many people in the world know, and like I get to work on a project with them. It's kind of cool, even if we don't interact at all while you're here.
Yeah,
Which
I've been like that too.
was how I felt, especially about working on Motherland Season 2, because Amanda Tapping was an executive producer on it and a director for a couple of the episodes. And she was one of my biggest heroes growing up, watching Stargate with my dad. And one day we were working at Deer Lake Park, and I was walking back from Crafty to my lockup. They were setting up a intimacy scene under a willow tree at Deer Lake Park on a day when it was pouring rain. So they spent 2.5 hours trying to get it set up so that they could do this sex scene under a willow tree in the torrential downpour. And we had a brief reprieve in the rain where it had stopped raining for a bit. And I was walking back from Crafty. There was this guy on set that even from season 1, like I saw him on set every day. He always looked like the happiest person there, and I never had any idea what he did. I couldn't figure out like what department he was in and whatnot. So walking back from Crafty, I decided to spark up a conversation, and I asked him what he did, and he was like, "Oh, I'm the showrunner. I wrote the show." And I was like, "Oh, that explains everything. No wonder you're the happiest person. Your dream is coming true right now." And then like we started bonding a little bit about writing because I'm a hobbyist writer too. I write a little sci-fi fantasy series that I've been working on. So we were talking about that a little bit and about his like sci-fi fantasy inspirations. And then I mentioned Amanda Tapping because of Stargate, right? And then I like basically said that like she's one of the reasons why I went into engineering in the first place in university because of the character, Sam Carter. And his face just lit up and he's like, "I'm going to embarrass you. She's going to love this." And she just happened to be like walking by like right in that moment. And he waves her over and he's like, "Hey, Amanda, meet Ryan. He went to engineering school because of your character in Stargate." And her face just like lit up in a big smile and she walked over and we chit-chatted for a little bit. It's just, oh man, I was on cloud 9 for a week after that. And it was, yeah, very memorable moment.
Yeah.
I would love to have her on this podcast at some point.
Hint, hint.
Yeah. Amanda, please hear this.
Well, she is somewhere out there in town.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I worked on Stargate SG-1 in the final season. I came on like around the halfway point that year. So yeah, I saw like what she was always like. The whole cast there always seemed very friendly and outgoing, and with the crew and everybody. So
well, from what I've heard, based on like interviews from afterwards and like gatherings, like I think they had it's like an anniversary special at some point for Stargate, and like it seemed and it feels like they actually became genuine friends by the end of the show, like whether or not
Right.
they were at the start. Because you hear about so many shows where like the leads end up like hating each other by the end of it, kind of thing. So it's heartwarming and it's kind of nice to see that they come out of it with this very tight group of friends that they consider kind of family almost.
yeah,
There's
especially that show's on for 10 years with. I mean, outside of two, Ben Browder and Claudia Black, everyone else had been on that show since pretty much the first season.
Yeah,
because they came on around season 10.
They came in
or
season 8.
Season 8. Yeah, they're on the last 2 years.
Yeah, Richard Dean Anderson retired.
Yeah,
which I was so sad about that. I mean, his Colonel Mitchell was a decent enough replacement, but like Richard Dean Anderson, it's like Tony Stark in the Iron Mans, right? Like Richard Dean Anderson was Stargate for.
Yeah, for me it wasn't like I really liked the show Farscape. So when I saw that he and Claudia Black were moving over to Stargate because that show got canceled, I was actually pretty excited because I really like those two on that show. They worked great together, and again they sort of, their interaction on this show, because they'd worked together for like at least 4 years before that, it just felt a lot more organic. And so I think they fit in really well in that show. But yes, it was kind of sad to see Richard Dean Anderson go, but I totally get like why.
I mean, of all the shows where they had like, if you try to replace such a big main character like that, you're definitely going to lose some fan base and probably some quality of content. But
yeah,
that was one of the rare ones where I feel like even though a lot did have to change without him being there, they managed to do it in a way that didn't totally kill the universe for everyone.
Right.
And then, like, whereas, did you ever watch the Stargate Universe spinoff? Because after SG-1, they did Atlantis for 5 seasons, and then they did
the
Stargate
one on the ship
Universe.
that the ship keeps jumping.
Yeah.
I saw, like, I think I just saw the first few episodes.
They ended the first season on a cliffhanger and then canceled it. I was choked.
Yeah, that'd suck.
And like,
why you should never end your seasons on a cliffhanger.
Right? But like ending your seasons on a cliffhanger was so, well, especially in that era, it happened a lot, but like Stargate, almost every season ended on a cliffhanger. So maybe that was just a Stargate thing, but yeah, it was so disappointing because they're like, it's one of those situations where like they're jumping now between galaxies into this huge dead space, so there's no resources.
Right.
They're short on one pod, so one person can't be in stasis. And it ends up being like the main character genius kid that is like basically the Sam Carter of that show.
Right.
Because he has the best chance at fixing the pod and then going in, right? And then they like end it with literally the ship jumping and then him just like standing at the console. And then like I don't even think it was 2 months later they announced that it was canceled.
I guess no one was watching it. Sad thing.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but honestly, it wasn't that great. I missed Stargate Atlantis. They also didn't. Oh, you know what it was? I think part of it was the writer's strike because they were supposed to do a movie for Atlantis as well.
Right.
Because Atlantis also ends on a cliffhanger. They end up parking the city Atlantis ship in San Francisco Bay. It just like touches down in the ocean, and even though it's cloaked, it makes like a tsunami into the city. How does anybody miss that this giant thing just landed in the bay? And then, yeah, that's like the last Stargate content is that there is now a giant alien city ship in San Francisco, and somehow nobody noticed it's there.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't really watch Atlantis that much, so I totally missed that one. Oh, well. That's what happens when shows get canceled on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the first one.
Before we wrap up, I would really like to get a couple stories maybe from you about some of the most creative things you've seen on set, whether they be problem-solving solutions or ways that you guys filmed something or just like interactions between people that you might have seen.
Huh.
What are some stories that pop out in your mind?
One of my favorite things that I still can remember was working on Arrow, and I always loved watching the stunt team do their job and how they're going to come up with something. And there was this one night when we were standing on the viaduct, and the scene was basically a guy gets tossed over the edge of the viaduct, and right below us is the skate park, so it's about 25, 30-foot drop. And so I was standing on the viaduct watching this moment where the Green Arrow is supposed to run and dive off it, and watching how they put that together. How they accomplish that without wires.
Oh. Does someone actually jump over the edge? I'm assuming there had to be a giant landing pad at the bottom.
A lot of boxes.
Boxes?
Yeah, boxes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I always loved like anything those guys did. There was that, or watching them on top of the old Canada Post building. There was a big fight scene where one of the villain jumps off the front of the building, and the Green Arrow jumps and grabs him midair. Again, just kind of watching those guys work and to time all that.
My stomach is sinking just hearing the story.
It's basically, the stunt coordinator coming up with this scene and how you're going to accomplish it. And those guys are all in wires because obviously you're not going to drop down to Georgia Street. A few stories. But, always watching those guys. Some of the most creative things I've seen, obviously, are some of the sets that have been built.
There's some really cool sets
over the years
that get built. Motherland had some really interesting set builds.
One of my favorite sets of all was on a show called Eureka, a TV series.
Oh, I loved that show.
It was the main set, the Global Dynamics set.
I didn't know they filmed that here.
Yeah, filmed it in the Arrow stages actually, where Arrow would eventually set up a few years later. But
to me, I think that is one of the most underrated like small sci-fi series. It was so fun. It was such a fun show.
I worked on it like for basically season 2 and 3, and it was long. Like that was a show with a lot of long hours. Like 18 hours were typical.
Really?
For us as PAs working on it.
What about it? Like, why were the days so long on that show?
Oh, I think it was just hard to get everything they wanted, everything they needed. There was obviously a lot of little visual effects things going on throughout it, and it just took a long time. Some days were long, but it was a lot of fun watching the outcome of it. And
one of the episodes they do cover of She Blinded Me with Science, and that the cover version of it from that episode is better than the original, in my opinion. And again, another really fun episode. I can't remember exactly what happened in it, but there was like some kind of it's like a chemical agent or something that was like making people act kind of weird, and it made one of the main characters just like super, like he was falling in love with someone and was like not scared to announce it to everyone. So in the main like hallway area of the, I can't remember the name of the place, Dynamics, the name?
Global Dynamics.
Global Dynamics. Like in their main like courtyard foyer area, he just like bursts out and starts singing She Blinded Me with Science. And yeah, it was, that show is so fun. I love that show.
One of the things that I don't know if viewers would have picked up on it, but when you're standing on the set and realizing on this one set I was on, there was a door here and a door opposite it. And one door said R2 and the other one said D2. But it's not something you can see on camera at the same time, right? So I don't know if anyone ever caught that, but when you're staying on set going...
That's a fun Easter egg.
Yeah.
I love it when they put little things like that into a production. Definitely. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I remember there was I think it was a reference to 007 movies at one of them. But I can't remember. It was just like the way that they were naming the sets or something.
Right.
It's like not anything that like people watching the movie would see or ever know about, but like it's kind of fun for the crew.
Yeah. A lot of those little Easter eggs are always kind of more fun for the crew.
Yeah.
Like every now and then, obviously when crew members' names gets put on doors of offices,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, or that anytime someone's looking at a list on a computer or on paper of all these different names, chances are half of them are probably crew members.
Oh,
Various people who works in the props department, or I'm gonna put my buddy's name down here.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes from just same thing with wanted posters in like police stations and sets are all basically like various crew members.
Yes, I was on Virgin River. They were doing one in the sheriff's office, and it was like all of the set deck team was on the wanted posters.
Actually, going back to Eureka, there was in the set for the restaurant, the Claw, there was this glass countertop with all these different photos in there. And one of the photos was a Polaroid that had like Josh in it. Speaking of Josh earlier.
You said Eureka. Do you mean Nancy Drew?
Oh, Nancy Drew. Sorry. Oh. Yeah. Sorry, Nancy Drew. There was, and there's other crew members in these Polaroids that was in this glass case that no one sees. No one's they don't take the camera and look at it. But it's just kind of fun for, those of us walking by going, oh, yeah, look.
Helps engage the crew in the project, too.
Yeah. I mean, there was one show I worked on where they had the CIA wall of all the stars of all the fallen people, and my name was actually in the book that's below it. And I walked by going, oh, one of my names there. Great.
Surely this can't be foreshadowing for something.
Cool. Yeah. But it's kind of fun when you see that. I mean, I know people who've had their names put on gravestones. Walking by, like in the cemetery, and the camera will pass by them, but yeah, you go, hey.
That's like, that was kind of double fun, but it's because it's like, yes, my spirit did die while filming this show.
Yes. Definitely.
Do you have any other fun creative stories for us from things you've seen on set?
Oh, if I really sit here long enough, hard enough, I could probably think of a few more. I mean, it's been like 20 years of working in film.
Yeah, you got a lot of content to dig through.
But yeah, but a lot of it also blends.
It's definitely like binging a show.
Well, there's a lot of things that I've probably forgotten about over the years too, and
especially with the long working hours, like 15+ hour days, the sleep deprivation, and then like if the project extends for 6+ months, like to me, I feel like the 6 month mark is really a show that's longer than 6 months should not have 12-hour shooting days.
Well, then you'd be longer than 6 months.
But like,
yeah, I mean, I've worked on TV shows that shot for 10 months, which is great for the bank account.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the time you're getting closer to the end of it, it's like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. And I get like, I'll take a few weeks off or take a month off. Or
honestly, if the show is 10 months long, you should take 2 months off and then just come back for the next season.
That's actually what I used to do on Arrow. When I first got hired on that in season 3, when season 3 was coming to an end, my boss got word that, oh, we're coming back for season 4 and we've been asked back. So I get asked like, do you want to come back? And it's like, okay, great. And then we'd have a tentative start date and be like, okay, well, that's 7 weeks from now or 8 weeks from now. Great.
Time to go to Mexico.
I've saved up enough. Think I could do it. Or what I'd do is maybe do like a day call here and there on some other show, right, for a little bit, but not like work every day.
Right.
But there was one time in between 2 of the seasons where my wife and I went on a 4-week road trip because we knew, okay, I'm finishing now. I'm coming back in 7 weeks. Got 4 weeks just to go off somewhere, go camping, go travel.
That
And
is
we
definitely
hit the
one of
road.
the nice parts of the film industry, that you can kind of jump in and out of it a little more easily than a regular job.
Yeah.
I've definitely met a few people on set that, like, they'll work for 6 to 10 months in the year and then literally go spend the rest of the time in Mexico. Like, there's a couple transport drivers that I met that have houses down there. They just, like, they work one show a year and then they go spend the rest of the time in Mexico.
Yeah, I've known a few people who've had places either in Costa Rica or Thailand, who usually around November, December, they would leave a show, go there for a few months, come back more in the springtime here. Maybe come back to the same show and finish it out if they're still shooting, and then work on some stuff in the summer and then do that again. But yeah, there's definitely some people who have their getaway homes.
Yeah.
But which is probably a good idea.
I mean, it definitely seems nice, and especially, well, until our recent insane bout of inflation that made everything ridiculously expensive everywhere.
True.
With film salaries, it was very possible to work only a portion of the year and then take part of the year off. And especially with how crappy our winters are, it's a good time to not work in the rain for 18 plus hours a day.
That's true. No, that's true. Actually, it was like that the other day when it was really pouring out, and I looked out the window and thought, okay, I'm kind of glad I'm not working right now. I really wish I was working right now, but at the same time, like, I don't want to be out in that. I'm glad I'm not out there when it's pouring rain for 15 hours.
Yes.
So,
there
or
was
longer.
Definitely, there was one, it was a 2-week period. I can't remember exactly why, but I wasn't, it was like one show had wrapped and I didn't have anything else lined up yet or something like that. It just worked out that I had 2 weeks off, and it ended up being literally the 2 weeks in that year where we got like the huge storm that we get every year that like shuts half of the Lower Mainland down.
Yeah.
And I managed to dodge it. Luckily, all of my friends were miserable working in like the worst rain conditions ever, and I got to sit at home next to the fireplace with my cat.
Nice. Yeah. That's nice when you can do that.
Yeah.
As long as you know you have the work coming up.
Yeah.
Then it works out better that way.
That is definitely, maybe before we finish, we touch on that a tiny little bit. Like, something in the film industry that is like everyone contends with is like, because it's project based, a lot of people have the mentality that I don't know when my next project is coming, so I need to take all the work I can. And then they end up working 12 months a year because they're scared to take time off. But that can be incredibly detrimental for mental health.
It can be, but I think part of it has to do with just finance management. Being able to... I have seen this happen where I've worked on shows with people who have not been very good with their money. They're on a show, they're making all this money, they're going out, every day they're coming in with, oh, look, I bought this new toy, or I bought this new thing, or I got this new stuff. It's like, okay, but this show lasts 7 weeks, and what are we all doing after that, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to stand there and lecture them about it. I just kind of think in my head, like, okay, see what goes on after the show's done, right? If you don't have another job.
Good luck.
Whereas I've kind of thought more about how much can I save up, because I know that. I think because I got into this business a little bit, I'd already had jobs before working in film. I didn't just jump from like high school or college right into this industry, which I've known a few people who have done that.
Right.
I had a whole other life before this, because I got into this when I was 30. And I knew what it was like to be young, poor, student, having just enough money for rent and maybe like KD or hot dogs or something.
Ramen, like the cheapest foods you can buy.
Yeah. So yeah, just learned how to try and save money as much as possible for those times, which is kind of one reason why I'm not doing too bad at this very moment. Of course, I haven't been off work all that much. I know some people who've been off work most of this year. I've managed to actually keep working for like about 8 months during this strike. Yeah, I was one of the fortunate few that kind of made it through this. Of course, now we just don't know when the next job is coming at this very moment, just because things still have to ramp up. So
Yeah.
the strikes are over, but doesn't mean jobs are coming here at this very moment. We got to wait for them.
Some encouraging news. Yesterday we had a couple costumers on, and one of them was saying that she's actually going back to work as of like December 7th because they
Oh.
want to get one episode in the can before they stop for the new year.
Yeah, I've heard a few shows are able to do that. I'm sure some of the MOWs, like some of those Hallmark ones,
Mhm.
are probably going to have at least one or two start up very shortly. It's just mostly, I guess, the bigger features. If they can start up soon, great. If not, they'll probably be like January.
Yeah, I kind
Some
of
of the
figured
some
most
of the
things would
some
be
of the other
starting in
series,
January.
like I already saw on the film list, Superman and Lois is coming back for a fourth season, and their production date starts in January. So
That
their
made
offices are open
sense
now.
to
But
me because
yeah,
like you're not gonna get very much done in December. You only work
no,
for 2, maybe 3 weeks of it, and during December, it gets harder to do things because vendors are busy and open less, and,
yeah.
like, the whole city, like, the atmosphere changes, people are harder to get in touch with, harder to, like, lock down for things.
Oh, and try getting rid of all the Christmas decorations. If your
Yes.
show doesn't take place at Christmas, good luck.
Um, so it kind of blew me away when she had mentioned that there are shows that are trying to get one
Well,
episode in, but she said that it's because it's mostly the recurring network shows doing
yes,
it. Their budgets are allocated on a yearly basis, so they're trying to use some of the budget from 2023 before they roll over into
right.
2024.
Well, that makes sense then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also, I guess it gets them a little bit of jump
a
on
little
it.
bit, but I feel like it's just going to make a bunch of people's lives more stressful because they're going to push for something, and then a lot of them are going to end up having to do reshoots in the new year because they didn't do it properly before.
Yeah. Oh well, they'll have more work.
Yeah, actually it's great for the crew members, not great for the producers, but
No, but they're probably already thinking about that anyways. That's not stuff that's slips by their minds too much.
I'm I would love to have a very candid conversation with a producer about the kinds of things they do and don't think about
Oh,
because
sure.
from my perspective, like there are certain decisions made around shows where you have to ask yourself who is making this decision and why do you have enough money and power to make this decision? Because like for example, one of them working on Virgin River, they do a community picnic scene every year. And I mentioned that like on season 2, the first season I worked on, it was at Deer Lake Park
Right.
and it was pouring down rain behind the Hart House while we were trying to set up like this outdoor stage with a bunch of tents and like a
Yeah.
week worth of prep where it was nice and sunny. The week they were supposed to shoot, all rain. Uh, so for the next year, for their big community picnic scene, which they dumped even more money into because they wanted to make it an even bigger, grander endeavor, they decided to do it on top of Grouse Mountain at the end of October.
So clouds,
Not just
snow.
clouds. Literally, so like the Friday, the only day that I actually worked on that event, I was lucky enough to be working on another show, so I only did one prep day with them. It was the last prep day of setting up on the mountain, and set deck had finished around 4:30. Went home, got off the mountain. Pretty much right around then, we started to get notice from like the liaison at the mountain that they were expecting 70 to 80-kilometer-an-hour winds that night. And then by 5:30, all of set deck's tents were blowing around down the field like they were tumbleweeds.
Right.
And all like whatever, I think we had like 7 PAs there, like just PAs running across the field, grabbing tents, like picking up tables and putting them back up. And like all of because they had made these stands like it was a night fair kind of thing, like they
Right.
had put up all these trinkets and decorations and like fake food and stuff, and all of them, everything tipped over. So their entire day of work is just completely thrown out the window.
Wow.
Which, if that wasn't bad enough, they get there on Monday to start shooting, and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground. And this is supposed to take place in California. And they had like $70,000 worth of damaged tents because the lunch tents like blew over and like metal frames bent, things were
Right.
being thrown all around, like 3 people got injured.
Wow.
So who's making these decisions? And I'm sorry, but you should be fired.
Yeah, I have no idea. Grouse Mountain is it's always a challenge with Grouse Mountain, no matter what. You got your cloud cover, potential snow if you're at the wrong time of the year.
Yeah.
It's also hard to get up there.
And the worst part, with the gondola, and like they have one service road that the
Yeah.
big trucks could go up, which they had to wait for because it's one direction only.
Yeah.
And like they start shooting at the end of August. You have all of September to film this where there is a very reasonable, tiny snow expectation to do this on a mountain. Why do you wait until the end of October to do it?
Yeah, good question.
Especially because it's a Netflix show. They release it all at once. It's not getting released within 3 months of when they finish shooting. It's going to take longer than that because it took them a year and a half to release the first season.
Right.
So it doesn't matter when they film the episodes.
Yeah, that's true.
It makes more sense if something has a shooting schedule because, like, if you need to have an episode out in a couple weeks for a network show, that makes sense to me. Like, they're fighting deadlines kind of thing. But if you're filming the whole thing, putting it in post, and then releasing it as one clump, why can't you film the summery things in the summer months?
Yeah. Oh, well.
It makes for good stories.
Yeah, it does. 10 years down the road, remember it as a good time.
Yeah.
Laugh about it. Go, yeah, good times.
All right. Well, I guess that about does it. Thanks for having this conversation with me, and thanks for deep diving into superheroes.
Thanks for inviting me. This is a lot of fun.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and perhaps you'll think about locations from a new perspective next time you watch a flick. Help us hit our 2K subs goal by smashing all those buttons, please. And now, check out this track by Victoria Groff, Moves Like the Devil.
1, 2. He moves like the devil, walking towards his front door. The gates of hell so familiar. He's the one you've been looking for. 'Cause you can't see the red flags when you're consumed by the fire. When you're wearing rose glasses, all you see is desire. Dancing round feet burning, now think I should stop. I'm not sure how. If I leave now, will I make it out? Can you help me out? Dancing round feet hurting, now think I should stop. I'm not sure how. If I leave now, will I make it out? Can you help me out? Ooh. Dancing round feet burning, now think I should stop. I'm not sure how. If I leave now, will I make it out? Can you help me out? Dancing round feet burning, now should I make a run? I'm not sure how. Yeah, I leave now, will I make it out? Can you help me out? I won't be hypnotized. I've learned my lesson so many times. I won't be fooled by his charm. This time I'm all